Irene Lyon is a nervous system expert who teaches people across the world how to work with the nervous system to transform trauma, heal body and mind, and live full creative lives. To date, her online programs and classes have reached over 9,500 people in over 90 countries. Irene has a master's degree in biomedical and health science and also has a knack for making complex info easy for all of us to understand and apply to our lives. She has extensively studied and practices the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais. Did I say that right?
Not quite.
Moshe?
Moshe Feldenkrais.
Really? Because I just interviewed a doctor
Moshe
that was spelled in the same way, and he pronounced it Moshe.
There you go.
Moshe. Interesting. Okay, so Moshe. Dang it.
Don't
Moshe.
worry. All good. He's not rolling over in his grave, I
My
promise.
nervous system is so tired. Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing, and Kathy Kane, founder of Somatic Practice. Irene spends her free time eating delicious food, hiking in the mountains, or walking along the Pacific Ocean in her hometown of Vancouver, British Columbia. Thank you for being here, Irene.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm really, really stoked for this one because as the wellness industry grows, almost exponentially at this point, everyone considers themselves these days to be trauma expert, nervous system expert, like vagus nerve expert, somatic, some sort of practitioner that is trauma informed. And obviously trauma is a massive topic these days, understandably. But you're someone who, like I read in your bio, breaks it down in ways that are very easy to digest and is sort of a breath of fresh air. And I think it's because you've been doing this for quite a long time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So could you give a background into your journey and how you came to work with the nervous system and trauma?
Well, the first thing I'll say is it wasn't intentional. So a lot of the folks that I know and my students, they want to do this somatic trauma healing work. Like we don't even have a name for it, just so you know, like medicine has a name, but what we do is still being figured out, right? It isn't a branch yet from what I can see. It's embryonic. It's just starting. So many of my students get into the work because they were helped by it, usually through my courses. I got into the work because I was already practicing the Feldenkrais method. I was an exercise trainer, exercise physiologist, working with humans, been working with humans since 1997. And I got into, let's just say SE, somatic experiencing, and the early trauma pieces because I couldn't help my Feldenkrais students to the degree that I knew I needed to. So I was having really good results with some people, and then some, I was doing what I was trained and what had helped me. But it's like, it's not working. Like I would work with these people, and the Feldenkrais method is phenomenal.
Can you share what that is briefly?
I can.
Is it one of those things
where
it's
park
like
that and then I'll come back to it?
Okay.
Yeah, no, it deserves a little more time.
Got it. Okay.
So I'm in this practice. I'm like, why with some of these people am I not getting the same results that I had gotten? So I'm going to back this a bit. I got into the Feldenkrais method because my 10 years of exercise science and fitness rehab education wasn't helping me rehab a patella fracture. And the details, I can go into that, but suffice it to say, I was adrenaline sport junkie. I ski raced, I figure skated, I paraglided, I did all these things, and I was not recovering, even with close to 10 years of exercise rehab.
Wow. And
I was teaching others how to recover from injuries. And so here I am 6 months post-op, and I'm going to physical therapy, massage, all sorts of stuff that I was finding. And it was when I finally went to a chiropractor, I'm like, okay, something's not right here. And my physical therapist said, you need to try something else because I don't even know what's wrong with you. You look symmetrical, you're strong, you're young, you're fit. I was in my mid-20s. Go see one of my colleagues down the road. This was actually in Australia at the time when I was doing my master's degree. He does something called Feldenkrais. And I said, okay. So I went and saw this person. Long story short, within a month of doing his lessons and seeing him maybe 3 times, Alec, like I don't even remember what happened in the sessions. My body was light as a feather. I had no more pain. no more like pulled muscles, no more strain. It was effortless. And I went, oh my God, like I have to study this. So I studied it from 2004 to 2007, took it up really well because of my background in sports science. But then 2008 comes around, I'm like rocking the private practice. I was in the ski town of Whistler, British Columbia. So I'm getting all the problem cases. And I knew all the people in this town. I lived there for 13 years. And so I would get the people who couldn't get helped through physio, massage, chiropractor. Nobody knows what's going on. They end up in my studio. And so I would help a lot of people. But the summer of 2008, I had a few people come in and nothing I did helped. I still remember these people. One was a woman who was blown. She had third-degree burns from a propane explosion.
Oh my goodness.
Think about this. She was ski touring in the backcountry. Their propane exploded.
Oh my God.
Oh, and so she's burned all over. And her fiance at the time had to haul her out. And I mean, that is a level of nervous system sensitization that is very difficult to work with. So she came to my classes and I'm like, oh God, I don't really know what to do with this because it's more than just the movement. It's more than just getting the spine and the pelvis all aligned. So these are parts of the Feldenkrais work. Another person, a ski patroller, had fallen off a cliff doing avalanche patrol. Had a backpack on, and their backpack always has spine, you ski.
Yeah, my dad lives in Colorado in the mountains. I almost said the exact place. I don't want to say that.
Okay.
In Colorado in the mountains.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
I've grown up like backcountry snowboarding.
Good. So he falls, no broken bones, neurologically fine, but like a year out, he was still in chronic pain. And his whole system was just seized and nobody could help him. And so I'm working with him and he'd have, more movement and then he'd come back the next week and be like, so this is like the entry point into the freeze response, right? The shutdown response, which we might get into. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what to do with this. Like I can move your spine and teach you how to move your spine and you're neurologically able because you're a ski patroller, but there's something under the carpet that I can't get to. Another woman had fallen off of a horse when she was a kiddo and had chronic back pain. And again, I'm trying to work with it. I'm like, what is not working here? And so I started to ask questions and one thing led to another. And that was when I got introduced to somatic experiencing and Peter Levine's work. So it was one of those things where I didn't question like, how much is this going to cost? How long is it going to take? Because a lot of people ask that now that I'm starting to train people. I'm like, if you are asking those questions as your first question and curiosity, this might not be for you.
Right.
So I just bought into it. I'm like, I got to study this. I signed up. It was 2008-ish. Trained in Carlsbad, SoCal with Stephen Hoskinson.
What a beautiful place to train.
Oh my God. Tamarack Beach Resort on the balcony at Briggs.
How long?
Ocean. It was 2.5 years.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, you're not there full time. You go there like 3 times a year.
Yeah, that's almost even better that way though, because it's like, I can't wait to be back.
It was pretty sweet. Yeah. So that was there. I spent a lot of time in Encinitas. A lot of the trainings were in the Bay Area just because that's where Peter developed his concepts, was at Cal at UC Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And there's just an energy there, with Esalen and that. So I felt really fortunate to be in that field, learning this stuff. Peter lived down the street, those sorts of things. So I did that training, got into it, and then I had the next pieces of tools to work with people. Of course, was that it? Of course not, because SE does not get deeply into pre-verbal trauma, early trauma, developmental trauma. It does, but not to the degree that then my other mentor, Kathy Kane, and her co-teacher, Stephen Terrell, they're both trained in SE. But like any method or any practice that's meant to evolve, the people that learn it have a piece, and then another person has a piece, and then it evolves. And so I got these tools, and I'm like, this is it. Like, this is a huge, it's not even a toolbox, Alec. It's like, it's a way of seeing humans differently. Yeah. And so I started practicing with these tools. But then something occurred in my system when I started to get into this trauma work. I did not have any idea what was stored in my system.
Wow.
So that goes back.
Was that because of like through working with other people you started becoming aware of it?
It was through my trainings.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I was a real functional human. I am a functional human, right? I had friends and I went to university and I knew how to work with people. I had a mind that was curious and all this stuff. And it wasn't until kind of the last year of our SE training, and I knew I had accidents, right? But I didn't realize how they were fitting into my system and stuck. And it was the end of our SE training in Carlsbad. And Peter Levine does a specialty workshop. He calls it Eye of the Needle. And it's working with surgical anesthesia and near-death states. A lot. So general surgery, people that wake up during surgery, which, by the way, happens a lot more than doctors care to admit.
I've had surgery 4 times. I cannot even imagine that.
You don't want to.
No.
And just for those that don't understand what that is, you wake up, you can't move, you're paralyzed, and you feel everything that's going on inside. So I just got shivers thinking about
Yeah, I don't
that.
need, that's literally like nightmare.
It's
nightmare.
actually, it has been one of, he's passed now, Robert Scaer wrote some great books, Trauma Spectrum and The Body Bears the Burden. He's passed, but was a medical doctor and really interested in this piece, and he doesn't get enough credit in my opinion. But when he was connected with Peter Levine talking about all these traumas, they did a loose study at the university he was at, and they wanted to test the severity of waking up during surgery. So they kind of did a closet study, and that they asked people to come in to do something. I can't remember the details, but they got a group of people who had been sexually abused and a group of people who had woken up during surgery. They didn't say what the study was for. They went through the same intervention in terms of questionnaire. The people that had been awake during surgery disappeared after the first interview.
Wow.
Do you know what that means? That basically means the shame.
Yeah.
And the triggering, the activation was so severe because when you are abused sexually, physically, yes, it's not good. Unless you're drugged, and that's a different situation, your motor capacity, we call it procedural defenses, kick up. Like you want to fight, you want to scream, you want to scratch, you want to strangle. Right. But when you're under anesthesia, you can't do that.
Yeah. So
you are actually so helpless, so completely helpless, that it hits a chord that is just beyond comprehension. And a lot of these people are gaslit by the medical community, surprise, surprise, because the moment you admit, especially anesthesiologists, that I screwed up, there's a lawsuit there.
Is it an error on their part that causes this to happen?
I don't think we can know.
Okay.
Because everybody is different chemically. Right. You know, one person has a glass of wine and they don't feel it at all, and one person sniffs wine and they're drunk, right? I say that loosely as just a metaphor.
Right.
So then you have someone going under, you don't know how they respond to anesthesia, and right? Mm-hmm. So I finished my SE training, going back to that, it was 2009, and there was a specialty class, Eye of the Needle, that Peter was doing in Tiburon in the Bay Area. And they needed demos. So they needed someone who had had surgeries, anesthesia states, to be on stage with him to teach the class. And I was like, I'll do it. No problem. And so I get up on this stage and it's a shit ton of people, you know, like probably 80 people, which is a lot of people for a trauma training. Way too many.
Well, it's also a lot of people to be doing a display in front of, like when it comes to trauma release. Yeah. And
I don't remember it. I actually would love to find the video of that to just watch myself now that I'm out of that. But what occurred was he wasn't that good in that session. And Peter is amazing because I've watched him work with so many people. But something in that field with me, I don't know what occurred. We had some commonality because he did his first ever SE training in Vancouver back in the 90s. He used to ski. He was taught how to ski by Nancy Green, who won an Olympic gold. The guy that built our house, his apprentice was her son. And so he connected with me asking about my history. And what I think happened is he forgot why he was there. Mm-hmm. And so he just kind of kept bringing me into more of the story of my accidents because they all started on ski hills.
I wonder too if like at some level your biofield, because it stores and carries that information, he on a subconscious level recognized it, so that pulled him into some of those states regarding his past.
I have no doubt, because at one point, like I talk a lot with my hands. Mm-hmm. And I don't think about it. And he saw, I have a habit of doing mudras mm-hmm. when I talk. And he got caught by them and he kept staring at them. And
wow.
And Peter likes the ladies, you know. Yeah. I look okay. So my sense is there was also that. I look a little different. Mm-hmm. Not to say that that's what was going on, but there was that. And then I was so in functional freeze that I was just taking in the information that I don't even think he realized I wasn't in good capacity to be doing this. I was just overriding my physicality. So that happened. I found out later, because after that, my system exploded, and I could talk about that. But years later, when I was out of the explosion of the traumas that started coming out of my system, his assistant, who was videotaping that, Justin, we were having a beer at a pub at some training ages after that. And I had to check in with him. I'm like, Justin, I'm not doing well, or this is what's happening. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry, Irene. And he goes, I've watched Peter do many, many sessions, hundreds. He said 2 sessions come to mind where I wanted to come up to him and hit him over the head with a hammer. This guy's and yours.
Wow.
So even he, behind the camera, could sense something wasn't right. Mm. And then I found out later at like a consult somewhere, the assistants that were there didn't think I should have been on the stage. Mm. I'm like, why didn't you guys say something?
Right.
Like what? But they needed a demo. So, that's a whole other story, why ethically that's happening with students who are really young and fresh. But the thing is people come off the street who are practitioners, clients who are difficult case studies, and he will work with these people. So I don't know why mine was so special, but it was, I finished that, I get in my car, I drive back to British Columbia, and literally as I am driving to home, my skin starts erupting in what looked like 3rd-degree burns.
Wow.
And I have always had skin, always. My history is inflammation, skin problems, eczema, rashes. It wasn't something that was uncommon to me. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole other story about my upbringing in an animal hospital that we can get into that goes into my exposure to chemicals. But I literally was like, something is not right. Mm. And over the course of 2 years, my body was covered from head to toe in what looked like 3rd-degree burns. I have 2 pictures or 3 pictures of this when it was just starting in 2010 in just some areas. But by the time I think about 12 months was over, I was just...
Wow.
Yeah. So I wasn't expecting that. And that was almost like do or die. If I wasn't with my husband, I met my husband right after this occurred, I don't know if I would have made it. Mm. Like it was that agonizing. I couldn't sleep for 6 months because of the pain. I had to sit up at night because I couldn't lay on my skin. Showering was excruciating because you had to still clean your skin so it doesn't get infected. I'd be screaming just because of the burning.
Oh my goodness.
And, obviously it's shifted and much better, but I had no clue. But nobody would have known.
Right.
So nobody would have known that my injuries and my functional freeze, and I can't tell you how many whiplashes I've had, how many concussions I've had, I've broken both arms twice, 7 surgeries on my left knee, 2 surgeries on my right knee, multiple ACL repairs for my I mean, it's just...
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. Figure skating, the amount of falling you do when you're learning figure skating, all these things, just one thing after the other. And then the rashes were a result of, and I've pieced this to my other trainers who are like, yep, that's what this is. It's called chemical trauma. So when someone, usually a child, is exposed to chemicals repeatedly over years, basically the fluids of the cells get traumatized. Actually, Carrie Bennett made me understand this at a whole other level. And it was so...
From fourth phase water perspective.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I knew nothing about her practices and all the circadian biology when I was healing this. My sense is if I had had that information in 2010, I would have had maybe a bit better of an ease out of it. But just to give you a concept, so my mother, Filipina, raised in the Philippines, when she was in university at Manila University, every week they sprayed their dorms with DDT.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's what you do where there's malaria. And she still remembers, come on, girls, close the windows. It's time to spray. And so here I am, an egg in her. And then I was born, obviously, from her. And she was a veterinary She was a veterinarian, but when she moved to Canada, she couldn't practice. So she met my dad, who is a veterinarian, and was an assistant for him in their practice. In vet medicine, you are covered in chemicals. You're inhaling things, you're cleaning things, formaldehyde, x-ray, fluid. So she's in this soup of chemical exposure while she's carrying me. And it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago when I looked at my baby pictures, because I've always looked at these pictures, and we moved, and, I just decided to flip through them just to check them out. I looked at myself and I was like, holy shit. I never realized how sick I was as a baby. So much so that when I showed one of my friends a picture who is into the detox world, she retracted back.
Wow.
She was repulsed by what she saw.
Wow.
So that just shows you how inflamed I was. I could hardly open my eyes. I was rashed, covered in rashes as a baby. I don't really know what they did. Like, I don't know what they thought of that, other than they probably slathered cortisone cream on me.
Right. Just suppressed it, right?
Right.
Instead of expressing the healing.
So that was my birth. And then I was literally in an animal hospital as a child because our house was the clinic.
Wow.
And it wasn't for the whole time, but when they were starting out, don't have any money, they started the practice in the basement. And so I was around all of that. And then as a child, I was in the clinic. And as soon as I was old enough to clean kennels, I was in kennels that weren't very good. You got a dog with parvo. You get to that kennel the next morning and there's feces everywhere, not to be descript, but that's what it is.
Right.
There's urine everywhere. I go in there, no gloves. This is where you do want to wear a mask. And I'm just breathing in the chemicals, the parasites, all these things.
And then spraying a bunch of stuff probably to clean it. I'm
inhaling it. And then you'd go to the run and you'd clean them. The amount of times I flea bathed animals. And I just found out that tick powder is, I can't verify this, but the source, I believe him, is a neurotoxin. Right? It's killing fleas. If you've ever tried to kill a flea, it's not easy.
Yeah, I would say most things that are like anti-life in some way are probably not good for us as well.
So I can still, as I sit here, I can still taste and remember the scent of flea powder. I was in it so much. And then my other job, which is just so ironic, was filling up little glass vials with hydrocortisone cream. And I would mix it with Hibitane, which is an antibacterial, and it would be all over my hands, and I would just rub it into my hands, and nobody knew. I did x-ray development, I did stool sample, like all the things. And so here's Irene in that soup till she's 21. It never occurred to anyone. And so when I was starting to heal the skin stuff and it was better, I took the photos that a doctor had taken to my teachers, Kathy and Steve. I'm like, do you think this could be chemical trauma? She's like, Yeah.
Yeah.
That's chemical trauma. And the weird thing is when we were lectured about fluid and chemical trauma in training, she said, and this is when I knew this is what I've been dealing with. She said, okay, we're going to go into the topic of chemical and fluid trauma. For those of you that have this, you are going to start to feel very weird. And it was odd that she preloaded this because I'm like, well, you're kind of priming us.
Yeah.
You're going to feel weird. You're going to feel nauseous. You might feel dizzy. And you might feel like you need to run out of the room.
What the heck?
I was in Denver at the time. I still remember it. I was like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's weird. Why would you feel that?
Is this before the Peter Levine incident or after?
Way after.
Okay.
This was after I had actually gotten out most of the rashes.
Got it. Okay.
And so I'm sitting there. No, sorry, it was in Portland. It was an introductory workshop. And my husband was with me because he's also a practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. And then she starts talking about it and the mechanisms of it and what's interesting. And so again, if anyone's listening to this, don't be weirded out if you feel a little wonky. Don't worry. You can work with it. But I started to feel physically sick.
Wow.
Everything she said, I felt like I was rocking in a boat. And so the hallmarks of chemical trauma, it's infecting or impacting the fluids, the exclusion zone water, a la Carrie Bennett and Pollock and all that. And I honestly, it was the most surreal thing because I was like steel. I could do anything. I could handle anything. I never got dizzy on anything. I jumps off, just no problem. But that was when I went to myself, okay, this is what I was just dealing with. And clearly there's still a lot of toxicity in my system. So there's a whole other piece that I don't even know I need to work with. The other thing, because some people will say, oh, I was exposed to chemicals one day at my dad's farm. No, because I've had some people ask, I was induced as a baby to with, I think, Pitocin. Is that chemical trauma? No. It has to be repeated exposure.
Would you say the caveat is that if there's a significant dose of it, though, in one time, you still think it has to be repeated? Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting.
Because the system can clean. I mean, not that the system can clean out completely. Mm-hmm. It depends on the person's emunctories and ability to clean. Right. But it needs to be repeated. Mm. The one case where that's not true, the other thing that creates fluid trauma is electrocution. Mm. So if you get an electrocution that is pretty severe, that one insult can disrupt the fluid in the cells, as you would think, because it's shifting the charge. Mm-hmm. And so people who grew up on farms, handling electric fences, electricians, I know people who were electrocuted because their house was hit by lightning when they were kids, these sorts of things, that can definitely create this fluid trauma. And when I've met people with this, they literally look like a brittle stick that's about to crack.
Wow.
Like you can tell there's no juice.
Like dehydrated almost. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And drinking all the water in the world will not make a difference.
Of course, because that's not the primary way to hydrate.
Exactly. So, anyway, so that's a long way of saying that was sort of my entry into it, was through career. I need to get another piece. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh man, there is a lot in here. And how many other people out there have this level of stuff stuck in? My husband and I have talked about this in some of my teachers, not to make myself special, but that combo of chemical trauma with my sport is uncommon. And so I think I had some double whammies that I was dealing with. And then I was an overachiever. So I was also pushing in that way. And so that trifecta compounded, I think, led me to this like perfect storm of this stuff has to get out. And it was not done, in my opinion, in a good titrated way. Because people we're still new in this work. Yeah. Right?
Man, there's so many directions I want to go with everything that you said there. I already know this is going to be a long one and a good one, but so the one thing I do want to comment on briefly there, just what's coming up for me, especially with understanding German new medicine. I'm sure you've had people relay to you that, that is like a separation conflict you're experiencing. And this is where like I've come to personally take a nuanced approach to German New Medicine.
Good.
And I think that in many cases, when it comes to a conflict and the expression of symptoms associated with it, I would say possibly, and I'm sure you've thought this, that experience with Peter Levine in that instance was a separation conflict. But it's the separation conflict is also ultimately expressing in that way, both because of your mental orientation surrounding that event, consciously or subconsciously, right? But also because of the toxin exposure when you were younger, and the memory of that in the waters of your body now being invited to express.
Yep.
Okay, so you're saying yes to all of that. And then, so the one question I have is, do you think that this incident with Peter Levine on stage was an invitation to your body to express way too much of that load of toxicity that was stored? Or was it triggering some sort of mechanism in the water of your body to remember that instance all too quickly at once?
That's a great question. I can't answer it.
Have you thought about it though?
Oh yeah, at length, but I don't spend too much time trying to meditate on it because I was still pretty darn functionally frozen. And when you are in that state of this, and I'll use a fancy word, this high tone dorsal shutdown of the parasympathetic, it's part of the vagus nerve, which we can get into more later. You're not online. Like I'm online, like I was able to know where I am. And
partially disassociated though in some way?
It's like a dissociation, but if you ask me to do a math equation, not a big one, I would be there in my brain. It's almost like, we talk about the matrix, living in the matrix. It's almost like you're in your own matrix, but there's meta levels of that in different parts of your body. So I have no doubt that my fluids were resonating with something, or maybe they were screaming like mad, stop, stop. But my consciousness isn't picking up on that. Peter's not picking up on that because for whatever reason, he's on a totally different chart. And there's no regret. Like, this is what I want to be very clear of. People make mistakes so that we can learn from them. I know that that ground zero and all the other ground zeros I've had are there so that I can make sure others don't have to deal with that. Because I just said this to those who want to study with me. Literally, the email went out today. It was a long essay about training in this work. I was oblivious. A lot of the people going into the training now are not oblivious. And some people are hesitating pushing forward because they know how bad it can get before it gets better. So the question is, can we actually mitigate some of these expressions of trauma, whether it's chemical trauma? Shock trauma is a whole other can of worms when it comes to fascial pain and injuries. And I am still dealing with that to this week from all my old injuries. Like, how can we make sure that when a person goes into this nervous system healing at this level, not band-aiding and not just coping and management strategies, they're not trying to get it all fixed in like a year. And some people will be like, what, a year? I'm like, yeah, dude, this can take a decade to get out of. It doesn't mean that the first year isn't going to pop you up into a whole other threshold of amazing capacity and less panic attacks and this sort of thing. But we do not realize, I think, as a human species, especially in the West, if I can use that term, how much we have stored generationally as well as current, the level of conditioning, the domestication of plants and animals, agriculture, industrialization, tech, the lights, all these things.
Sorry.
I don't care. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It's not.
Luckily, I don't live in this place. Nor do I sit here all the time.
No. I mean, we are resilient, right? So there's this element that I like to look at the macro so often and go, we really need to slow the F down. Because if we could slow it down and teach people some baseline stuff, foundational stuff, just like you have to teach a child their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, we might actually be able to come out of this a lot easier. Because if everyone is having to go through what I just went through the last 10 years, no one's going to get anywhere. Because there's not enough practitioners in the world right now, Alec, to do the level of work I had to do with practitioners to get through this stuff. Whether it was physical work through my broken body parts or this chemical trauma piece. Most people, they don't have the time and they don't have the resources. I was lucky because I had financial stability. I had a good partner. I didn't need to sell my home to heal, which so many people might have to, especially in this country. So that's the thing. It's how can we slow it down? I know everybody wants to speed up and figure out the way to biohack the trauma. I'm just here to say you can't do it. And it almost happened with me by getting that session with Peter, but it took 8 years to come out of that. Because that was 2010.
Wow.
Right? More than that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you brought up getting back to the basics, sort of the fundamentals, and I think to lay the groundwork for the rest of this discussion, I'd like to establish terms and what they mean. So what is the nervous system?
We have many.
Okay.
So I'll teach with my hands because that's how I do it. We have a central nervous system. So central is center, brain, spinal cord. Then we have a peripheral nervous system. So there's two, really. Peripheral is peripheral vision, periphery, anything that comes out of the brain, anything that comes out of the spinal cord.
Got it.
Okay. The brain has cranial nerves. I can't tell you where they all are. I've lost that anatomy, but one of the big ones everybody talks about is the vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve. So there are nerves that come out of the brain. They feed through, they go to places, face, throat, gut, heart, all that. The other part of the peripheral nervous system that people tend to not think about is all the motor neurons. So we can move our arms, we can move our hands, we can jump, skip, all of that. The other portion of the peripheral is the digestion, the autonomic functions. So you've got your peripheral nervous system. Under that is the autonomic nervous system. So when people talk about healing the nervous system, typically what they mean is autonomic. So I'm going to park that for a second. So you've got your autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral. That autonomic has two main systems, sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic, most people know, that's fight, flight. But you also need that if you go for a run, right? If we start doing the dishes over there, we're going to need more of that.
Workout.
Yeah, exactly. The parasympathetic is a bit more complex. It is the rest digest, because a lot of people just say parasympathetic is rest digest. It also has what's called ventral. So I'm going to break it down. So there's something called dorsal vagal, ventral vagal. Dorsal vagal and ventral vagal are called vagal because it's the vagus nerve.
Got it.
So when that vagus nerve comes out of your brain, the ventral means front of the brainstem, ventre, the front, French, dorsal fin, back of the brainstem. So it snakes through. The ventral goes, for the sake of simplicity, think face, throat, larynx, pharynx, voice box area, and the heart, and above the diaphragm. So lungs, that's ventral. Dorsal goes behind the brainstem. It's everything below the diaphragm, all the viscera, organs, reproductive, gut, spleen, kidneys, all that. Now, there's more. The dorsal has two tones. Think of it like a car engine. You have an engine, it has gears. You go into first gear, it's the same engine. You go into fifth gear, it's the same engine. It's just different gears. So you've got high tone dorsal, so high tone dorsal and low tone dorsal. High tone dorsal is everything below the diaphragm. It's the gut. It's that rest digest. Low tone dorsal is still the gut. Sorry, I'm gonna go back. So we've got high tone dorsal, low tone dorsal. High tone dorsal, I made a mistake. Little correction there. High tone dorsal is the shutdown response.
I was going to say, because you mentioned fight, flight, so this has to be where the freeze
Sorry,
is.
yeah. So, but there's a nuance. So we've got fight, flight. People often say freeze. Freeze is a dual state. Freeze has fight, flight, and it also has high tone dorsal.
Oh, okay.
So if you have the classic is deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
That's freeze. Person goes into kind of a shock. That's freeze. They numb out, but there is still fight, flight energy because they're tense.
Yeah.
If you can't fight, if you can't escape, this is where the whole polyvagal element comes in. I can't fight. I can't connect. I can't flee. I'm frozen. I can't stay there forever. I'm going to collapse. So it's shut down. So high tone dorsal of the parasympathetic is the shutdown response. It's the collapse response. Low tone dorsal of the parasympathetic is rest digest.
Got it.
So what happens is, we want fight, flight, freeze, collapse. It's our autonomic physiology to protect, but we want to live mostly in the low tone rest digest. We also want to live mostly in the ventral. I haven't even talked about the ventral. This, like right now, you guys are social engaging. We're nodding our heads. We're chilled out. That is called ventral vagal. So that part of the vagus nerve goes to the face, throat, larynx, pharynx, heart. When you pop that ventral vagal on, it calms the heart. So in order to also flesh this out, we have to talk about babies in a second. So to go back, I'm going to go back up. Peripheral nervous system, central nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is this autonomic nervous system. It's also the sensory motor. What happens is when someone is stuck in fight, flight, freeze, and let's just say shutdown, they are dysregulated. All of the energies are co-opted to fight, flight, freeze, shutdown. But what happens is this important rest digest piece gets sort of forgotten about. It's kind of like if you have a burning building, you're going to go into survival mode to put the fire out. You're not going to go think about buying groceries for the fridge. So what happens is when you are in this constant state of dysregulation, there cannot be any rest and digest. This is where the terms autophagy come in, apoptosis, killing cancer cells, all these things that we know are important for keeping a healthy, repaired, rejuvenated, vital system. It doesn't happen. Or if it happens, it's like flickers.
Right.
And so this is the connection between, let's just say, early childhood trauma, constant stress, a big life event, and then years later or decades later, chronic illness, cancer, heart disease, autoimmune conditions. It's because the system can't go into that true rest digest of the low tone dorsal parasympathetic. Back in the day, they would say that the sympathetic and the parasympathetic are have reciprocity. So as one goes up, the other kicks in to bring it down. It's not that simple. So
that sounds very mechanistic, and I don't think we're like that.
We're not, but that is, no offense, Huberman, you still talk that way.
Right.
And it's not, I don't think, his fault. He just hasn't come across Stephen Porges' work, who really put on the map this polyvagal nuance. And it's about the primitive nature and it evolving. So the rest digest, we all need, mammals need. But that deep shutdown, the deep shutdown is primitive to the big fishes in the ocean that can survive underwater with no oxygen for a long time, right? It's what bears use to hibernate. They have to go into that low conservation, metabolic conservation function to survive. But humans are a little different because we're really social. And then you add in the stress of life, you add in this higher brain.
For better and for worse.
Yep. And you can divert your need to rest, to fight, to flee, to say, this isn't healthy. I'm not rest digesting. I got to get out of this. We can override that for an entire lifetime. We could say that most humans who have died, and this is a huge generalization, have never experienced full regulation, especially if they die of an illness, right?
Right.
And so So does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense,
Okay.
yeah.
So the conundrum with this whole nervous system thing is when we're born as humans, we do not have a functioning ventral vagal. We have a functioning shutdown. We have a little bit of the fight flight. If we are full term and healthy, we do have a functioning low tone rest digest. You've had kids, healthy baby, they poop, they pee, they're hungry.
Mhm.
There's no trouble,
Mhm.
right? But that ventral is not on board yet. And so the other thing I didn't mention is the vagus nerve that goes to the face, this larynx, pharynx, heart, it's myelinated.
Mhm.
The one that goes below the diaphragm, the dorsal branch, is not myelinated. It's primitive. So myelination, do you know what that is?
Yes, but could you explain it? I
Yeah.
know, if you could
The
explain it.
it's this fat sheath that is around all nerves. And that's why we need cholesterol and good fat, FYI. So when that fatty sheath is around the nerve, it's like smooth conduction and it's refined. And so this primitive part of the parasympathetic, the dorsal, doesn't have myelination. So it works no matter what. That is why if we need to go into shutdown, it happens fast and it's clunky. The ventral needs to be built up through co-regulation. So when you got little baby, you got to hold that baby. You've got to see the baby. You got to talk to the baby. Baby cries. It's not because they're trying to be difficult. They are in physiological distress. So what is it? Hunger, coldness, fear, gas, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Parent is off. They'll feel that. They'll be in distress, all these things. So you connect with them. Hello. And you talk and you rock and you feed and you keep them warm or you cool them down. Every moment you do that with an infant, it builds that myelination.
Mhm.
And this is most important in the first 3 years of life. So that happens, and that is what creates what we call self-regulation, but it's self-regulation of this ventral vagal aspect of the vagus nerve. What I haven't mentioned, that ventral vagal goes to the heart. It goes specifically to what we call the pacemaker. It's called the sinoatrial node. So as a little human gets more nuanced and more co-regulated with, they learn little drops of, I'm okay. Oh, if I make this cry, I get this help. And then that pacemaker gets a nice, soft learning of how to come down slowly, right? So baby's crying, I'm upset, I'm hungry, mom or dad or nanny come in. Oh, it's okay, little one. Oh, someone's there. And there's this nice, slow, and that is what creates the self-regulation. And it needs to happen with connection.
Mhm.
Here's one way to prove this point. You've probably seen, there was a real popular video that went out called Om Baby.
Mhm.
You don't know how mad that makes me. Because here's this little girl screaming, dude with his shirt off, looks at the camera. I'm going to show you something cool. He does this deep baritone Om. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with Om
Mhm.
or toning when you are doing it for a therapeutic purpose as an adult.
Mhm.
That little baby, you watch it. It's one specific video I'm thinking about. She goes into a bit of a shock and then she shuts down. There's no social connection. There's no talking. There's no slow coming down to teach this nervous system how to find that ventral vagal. She's being hit with a very big baritone sound. It's a vibratory sound, especially when you're that little, big guy. And it's putting her into a slight freeze because she's in fight flight, wailing, slight freeze, and she shuts up quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, you've held your babies. Typically, when they're upset, you just don't hold them up and then they're mute.
No, it takes some time
It
for
does.
sure.
And it doesn't have to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
It could only maybe take a minute or so. But the immediacy of watching that little one in this specific video go into high terror and crying, and then that is a great example of this polyvagal ladder of intense distress, dorsal, high tone dorsal shutdown.
Mhm.
The trouble with that is if that happens, I mean, it's not going to harm them if it's done once.
Mhm.
Right? But if that is the way that parent interacts to teach that little one, there's no connection. It would be interesting to see what would occur. How does this little one deal with intensity later in life?
Yeah.
Does she just look to numb herself out? And so that's a very specific example, because I know it's in that field of that world. But if we think of a classic one, which has been taught, and I think is still being taught to a lot of parents, is you have to let your baby cry it out. So that example of Daddy it's like kind of the same. But what's happening with the cry it out method, which is where the pediatricians say you have to let your baby cry it out, because if you don't, they won't learn how to self-soothe. Right. It's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I haven't taken time to look at the history of why that came in, but baby is in distress. They're crying. Nobody's coming. Eventually, they will shut down. Or another option is they stay in that high state of sympathetic with a little freeze. So some babies will collapse and some will maintain that rigidity. And so you'll hear some parents say, oh yeah, you were such a good baby. You never cried. Like, that's not good. Crying is our only method of communication. So if we were not given that opportunity to have that co-regulation and be taken care of, we will learn from a very young age how to default into survival strategies to manage our state of internal stress. So I share that piece because that comes back to, what is the nervous system? How does it mix in with this? And I think there's not enough nuanced conversation when people talk about, I'm trying to regulate my nervous system. You really have to understand, well, what came before your desire to regulate your nervous system? What were you dealing with? Was it this situation of crying it out? Or were you picked up by your mother or your father, but they were nervous? And I have lots of clients and students that are like, I loved my kids so much, and I did all the things. I co-slept, I attuned, I fed on demand, and she still ended up totally anxious and on the spectrum. What happened?
It's more of a question of how their nervous system was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the moms and dads that like go deep and are willing to say, it was me, are the ones who heal those relationships, because they're like, holy moly, I was actually dysregulated. So no amount of good behavior in the world is going to make a difference, because that little one can feel the dysregulation in the parent. And that's a big one to kind of unpack, because then it's like, well, what are we supposed to do? It's like, well, this is why I said a little while ago, we got to take this slow, because it's not enough to just say, yep, you got to regulate your nervous system. Don't have babies for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's not going to work that way.
What if you already have babies? Well, it's so interesting, and I want to pin this for later, because I want to get into how to approach children, age 0 to 7 who have maybe you're not a parent yet. For those who are listening and watching, how to approach that versus children who are beyond 7 or beyond age 3. You mentioned that as a significant year that you've already traumatized to some degree. How do we reapproach integrating that? Especially because, just as a quick anecdote, I would say that my wife and I were more dysregulated with our son, and he's 7. Okay. There was also a lot more birth trauma, a lot of stuff. But you can see the difference at this juncture. Grayson, if you watch this in the future, know that I love you just the same, but you can see the difference between my son and my daughter for sure. Because we were much more dysregulated and doing all of the things, but again, more dysregulated with our son than we were or are now with our daughter. I'm not saying we're perfect right now either.
No. Well, the thing is you have the awareness, right?
Yeah.
And you know more nuance because of the conversations you've had, because of the zeitgeist is changing. I mean, what you just said, I have no doubt that there are, if not hundreds of thousands, that might be a bit too much, but thousands of couples with kids. And I know some of these people who had kids early, and then they've had children recently with more regulation. And it doesn't mean you have to have a home birth or any of that. It's just your process is completely different, and you see the difference. As you've just said, that's a study in itself. That's an epidemiologist's joy right there, to look at families that have done it differently, because we would see a trend. The cool thing, Alec, is that it doesn't take much to shift. But both, if you've got two people, they both have to be on the same page. Because if there is a tug of war around this, that will actually cause, from what I've seen, more stress. So this then comes back to relationships and how do you choose who you hang out with and who your partner is and what is good and what isn't good, what is toxic, what can you handle, what is irreconcilable differences versus, I just don't like the way they dress, right?
Or the way I chew for my wife.
There you go. There's always something. My husband leaves wrappers on the countertop. It's like the garbage is right there. Is it that hard?
But you still love them,
Of
though.
course I do.
You overlook that one, yeah. So the second question I have is, again, to set this foundation, is what is trauma? Because that one, more than nervous system, I think at this point, is a word that gets thrown around like none other.
Yes, it does.
It means everything, but it's also lost all meaning. Like it's just a word that people say now. So what is trauma according to you?
So from my predecessors in my lineage, which is somatic experiencing, trauma is not in the event. It is within the autonomic nervous system physiology and everything it touches, within everything the peripheral nervous system and central nervous system touches. So you can have, to give one simple analogy, you can have someone who gets into, say, a minor car accident, like a fender bender. No big deal. So easy that no need for insurance. It's just, oops, little bump. Person A might walk away from that totally fine. That was, now I'm going to be late for this, but I'm fine. And they really are fine. Person B walks out of this and is a mess. They are frightened. They can't sleep that night. 3 days later, their gut goes off. They're afraid to drive. They're afraid of people. They then are afraid of leaving their house. This is an extreme situation, but I've heard these situations. The difference is not in the event. The difference is in how regulated or dysregulated was that person going into the event. So that's one example. So if you've got someone who has a boatload of stuff in their system and they don't even know it's there, you can have an event that triggers it to come out and undone, kind of like my session with Peter. And that is an indication that that person probably had a lot of dysregulation and most likely a lot stored up from childhood that they had no clue. And you sort of hear this, like in grad school, there's often studies where people will be like, the person was fine going into grad school and now they're a mess. Actually, Peter Levine's first client was this case. He saw this woman who in the 60s represented with what we would call fibromyalgia, autoimmune, severe premenstrual syndrome, anxiety, panic. And she went from this functional, beautiful, thriving academic to like a mess. And he writes about her in all of his books. He calls her Nancy. And so she comes to his office and was there because nothing could help her. And they knew he was like the brain doctor, even though he wasn't a doctor. He was studying biophysics. And so he thought, okay, well, I'll do some relaxation techniques. So this is when meditation and breath work was starting to come up. So he tried to make her relax. And he got an outcome that he didn't expect. She went into panic, went into anxiety, and he didn't know what was going on. And long story short, he had this vision to say to her, Nancy, run like you're running away from a tiger. This is where his book, Waking the Tiger, comes in. And he says it was a gift from the gods. He don't know. It's like, this is what I saw, a tiger run from the tiger. So she's sitting in a chair like we are, and she's panicking. And he says, run. And so she's literally running on the spot in her chair, total involuntary movement. She's not thinking about it. It's coming from her autonomic nervous system. And then she has a flash of an image of being a 5-year-old girl getting her tonsils taken out with ether going over her face, and she's trying to fight to get away, and she can't, and then she goes out.
Wow.
So I use that example, and I have examples of this with clients where it's like, what happened? You were fine, and then all of a sudden you're not fine. I think for her, it was the stress of grad school that tipped over the edge what was already stored in her system. He happened to see her and have this epiphany, run like you're running from a tiger. So she releases what we would call stored procedural memory, the procedure that I wanted to break free from these medical people and I couldn't. So that's locked in her autonomic nervous system, in her motor memory, in the musculature's motor pathways. And she released it. And not that that like cured her 100%. The story goes, she was like 50% better after that session. So back to your question, what is trauma? There is an example where the trauma was not in something that happened. It was stored in her nervous system physiology in this trapped procedural memory of trying to fight and get out. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense.
Now, the missing piece in the general model of SE, because Peter knows this stuff because he's experienced, but what gets taught generally, they don't get into the earlier traumas. So if you have a child who's born and they have significant trauma at birth, it doesn't have to be abuse, but often it is. It could be surgeries. Little one's born and they need a bunch of surgeries, or they're born premature and they're in an NICU and they're tied up to all these tubes, right? Which is very common in our society. That is not one shock like her tonsillectomy. It is this slow steeping milieu of, I am not safe. What is happening? I can't make sense of this because I'm 2 weeks old or 3 years old or 2, whatever. And what occurs is that little system just feels that the world is dangerous. And I can't trust anyone, and I have to protect, and I have to shut down. And that is difficult because there's no one event. And so I'll give another example, and then I'll tie it together. Let's just say you have a baby who was fine, totally healthy, but then, there's a death in the family, or there's a disaster, and the parents are just stressed, and they can't attune, or they're not around, right? And so there's this misattunement, chronic needs never being met. That can also create this situation of no one is here for me. I have to do everything for myself. This was very common in my Gen X. Like everybody jokes about it, like how we were left to just figure it out.
I feel like it's the same for millennials in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. So, there's some goodness to that because we did figure it out and we definitely have a thicker skin, but we also did it out of necessity because nobody was there, right? And the classic, unless you're dying, you have to go to school kind of thing, right? And so we pushed and we overrode. But the misattunement piece in certain households where, again, the parents love the children, it's not about that, but the parent themselves don't have any interoceptive nuance, which is capacity to sense the insides. And it's actually our gut, again, back to that parasympathetic nervous system, that primitive nervous system that is our first brain. And, to pull out the fancy stats, like the vagus nerve has more nerves going from the gut to the brain than the brain to the gut.
Wow.
80% more. So 80% of the vagus pathways go from gut to brain and only 20 brain to gut. So our gut is sensing something's not right. Someone's not there. The way they touch me feels weird or harsh. Now, the baby isn't thinking this. It's all sensation. And so there's another snapshot of where things can go wrong. And so my experience, and most of my colleagues will back me up on this, it is often more difficult to work with someone who had the good childhood, but things were just slightly off. And often these humans, and I was kind of one of them, not completely, you just think that's how it is, right? A good story, one of my clients who fits the bill of this misattunement, plenty of money and shelter, and was never beaten and all those sorts of things, never abused sexually, but was really unwell with mental illness, trouble getting her anger out, chronic migraines, all these things. And for whatever reason, she told me this story one day where She said, yeah, I knew something was wrong when I was at a family picnic or a school thing. And I was playing with my girlfriend or my friend, like little, and we're out in the forest and we found something like kids do. And her friend said, let's bring this to our parents and show it to them. I'm sure you've had this with your kids, right? Mm-hmm. And my client looked at her and said, they don't care about us. Why would we want to show them this? So here's two kids, girls, same age. One is like excited, wants to connect with mom, dad, grandma. I want to show them this leaf or this frog or whatever. And here's my client in my office who's so sick and dysregulated, can't find relationship. And her experience of her family system is nobody gives a shit. Why would we go show this to them? That's tricky.
Yeah.
Because that is not just one event. That is your entire makeup.
Yeah.
That doesn't believe anybody cares. So back to your question, what is trauma? It's many things.
Yeah.
It can be that big accident. It can be war. It can be natural disasters. It can be vicarious trauma. But it also is this mix of misattunement, which I have found is more prevalent in North America, especially in America, due to the lack of paternity and maternity leave that is given socially to the people. Mm-hmm. You go to countries that are, say, Scandinavia, Austria. I spent a lot of time in Austria, for example. Not that they're perfect, and there's a lot of repression there. There is a baseline regulation because people have time to be with their children.
Yeah.
And you see the difference when you go to these countries, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Above and beyond.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Okay.
So there's so many directions I want to go with this. I think the next question I want to ask is related to generations and not specifically generational trauma. I would like to get into that at some point too. But, and I could be totally wrong about this. This could be just a narrative that is sort of thrown out there. The general sense is that our ancestors, whether recent or like distant ancestors, had it much more difficult overall than we do now, right? And I would say at the same time, I think in my mind that a lot of the various nefarious agendas that exist also are pulling us into greater convenience, which is making us less human. So I want to throw that in there as context for this. But what I'm kind of getting at is, given all of that I just stated, are we walking around more traumatized than our distant relatives? Or is it that we are just more aware now of the things that they suppressed and they weren't actually, quote, fine and more resilient than we are? They just suppressed it better than we do. Are we more fragile than they were? Like, what is the actual truth of that? And obviously this is in a very general sense because it's going to be unique to the individual, their family, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, it seems like everyone nowadays is traumatized, but it seems in general, on the surface at least, that we have it much easier nowadays than previous generations.
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's both because, you could say that our grandparents were more resilient. But my grandmother also had 2 deep freezes filled with food, pantries filled with food, and that didn't have to be there. It's like post-war trauma. Right? For example, and here's the thing, the cultures are so different because it depends where you came from, what was going on. But if I think about kind of my British, Irish on my dad's side, everything's proper. You don't cry. You don't talk about the fact that the dog died, that you lost a kid. That has an element of functional freeze and shut down. And, British aristocracy, like we joke about it in my trainings, like the stiff British upper lip is a real thing.
Right.
And it's not just like emotional and behavioral, you see it physically in the repression and in the lines in people's faces. Whereas then when you look at other cultures, like you almost know when someone is French because they have They have facial affect that is so, in my opinion, delicious. Same with Latin culture. The body types are even different. You see more curves in Latin cultures, and you see more of that repression in Scandinavian cultures. I was just in Austria with a lot of naked people, not weird in a way, like at a spa. And I look at the bodies of the women, and everyone's fit, but they're so closed.
Mm.
You know, and you just don't see that. Like if I'm in the Philippines, in the barrio where my mom grew up, it's not like that. People are dancing and they're singing and they're doing stupid karaoke that keeps you up till 2 a.m. Like, and they're just fun and all of this. So you also have to look at that, because the Filipino culture, they were destroyed by the Spaniards, the Japanese, the Americans kind of took them out of Japanese martial law. They have a lot to complain about. Right. So then we have here, like, of course, there's stuff here going on in North America, but not in that same way that's so direct and visual. But there's an element, I think, in North American culture where we are repressed, but we also have freedom. And I think there's a confusion to it. But then you have this melting pot of all the different cultures and all those generations.
Yeah.
It isn't just one. So like when you go to a very
It's not homogenized. Yeah.
Yeah, when you go to a homogenous country like Austria, you see it so clear.
Totally.
But then when you're here, it's like, what's going on? And so I do think it's confusing because you can't put your finger on it.
Right. Just something feels off in general. Yeah. I could totally see that.
And I'm not saying that multiculturalism isn't good. Like
No,
I grew up
totally
in a that's not what I'm saying.
I mean, on that note, I was just in Serbia, and I have a bias here. I am Serbian, and I've never been to Serbia. I'm part Serbian.
Yeah.
My last name is a Serbian last name. And when I was there, I had that instantaneous feeling as well, especially because Serbia is not currently part of the European Union, so it hasn't had that like unionized culture of Europe yet. So it's very Serbian, right?
It's got the...
And they just went through a traumatic war recently, right? With the split up of Yugoslavia. But you see the people overwhelmingly, the sense that I get, I was like, I feel so safe and regulated here. And I had this instant knowing of like, it's because of this homogenized culture where they all have just the general same outlook on life, characteristics, love for each other, like look after each other type of mentality that we don't have here. And also because I am part German, part Serbian, part British, part Irish, and my parents and their parents didn't do a good job of keeping those cultural customs. It was like, what are our cultural customs?
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're going to get when you put your hand in there.
No, exactly.
No, it's accurate. There's actually a wonderful book written by Bruce Perry. Do you know who he is? Bruce Perry, he's a psychiatrist, medical doctor. He's like the guy that would go in, well, actually it happened, I think, in Waco, disasters with, was it Koresh? Was that where he was? I can't remember.
Oh, like the Waco event?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So he's like the guy that he went into that one, for example, like, what are we going to do with these children?
Oh, my goodness.
So that's the level of stuff he deals with.
Yep.
But he wrote this beautiful book called Born for Love. He also wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised by a Dog, like for real. But there's a chapter in Born for Love. The subtitle is Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. And there's a chapter on Iceland. Now, this was written quite a while ago because I know Iceland has shifted a lot due to tourism, but back in the day, and maybe this is still the case, there were no prisons in Iceland. What does that say? There's no prisons. That means everybody kind of gets along.
And also, if someone does something wrong, it's clear they're focused on rehabilitation rather than just punishment.
Yeah. And so the chapter is called Warm as Iceland, because that warmth, and I think the term was, don't quote me on this, was social capital. And like, if you know that your neighbor is from your lineage, or the person on the other side of Iceland is part of your ancestry, you are more open to pay your taxes because you know they're going to your people. And you're willing to help the person on the street whose car is broken down. How many times do you drive by someone who might need help? And of course, we're not going to stop and help because they might be dangerous. And that's valid, right? And so this is where it gets tricky, this experiment of how we've mixed and mingled. I mean, I'm the product of that. So of course, But I think the other thing, to go back to your original question, I do think that we're also on a timeline in that we can't hold it anymore. While yes, there's toxins and shitty food and all the stuff and all the pharma and all that, I totally get that part of it. We're also overloaded with all the generational stuff that hasn't been dealt with.
I totally feel that.
And that is big on its own.
Yeah.
Even when you take all this other stuff out, we're just overloaded. We're at capacity. And then I think you add in the tech, the devoid quality of social engagement because of all of our devices. It's so painful because I'm staying in a hotel right now in Austin, and it's just, I live in this bubble with my husband, that's so idyllic. And when I'm in my trainings, we're just so connected and everybody's like on the same page. And then you go and eat breakfast in this hotel and you just see the sickness.
Yeah.
And you see the disconnection, and people just don't look well. And I don't mean overweight necessarily. I mean, they're not there.
Yeah.
And you feel it. And I feel like a weirdo sometimes when I'm in this space, because it's like, whoa, this is like, I'm trying not to judge, but like your brain can't help but see. And it's like, it's like Minority Report.
Yeah.
Like you just see these things pop up and you're like, this person over here is like this, and this family is screaming at their kids, and this family isn't looking at their kids, and this kid has 10 waffles on their plate. What are you doing?
Right.
And I take in all of that at once, and I almost have to kind of block it, but I also don't want to block it because I want to be connected.
Yeah.
And so think about that on a whole other level. Well, someone doesn't even have awareness of that. We're all seeing this and something's not registering, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think oddly, I'm pessimistic, I'm optimistic, I can be fatalistic, and I'm hopeful all in one, because I see what can happen when people get into their nervous systems and heal at a deep level. But then I see all this other stuff. I'm like, wow, we don't even realize how much cleanup we have to do.
I have some thoughts to add to that, if I may.
Please.
So I've thought about this quite a bit as it relates to just the sort of background underlying nervous system dysregulation that is pervasive across Western culture predominantly today. And I think like it almost goes without saying, but it's still important to touch on. It is the result of increasingly adapting to and adopting technology in the sort of technocratic ways. Even those of us who are very aware of it, you use YouTube, I use YouTube, I use like all the things, but at least we have awareness of it, so then we can kind of distance ourselves from going down that continual mindset. And we're like, whoa. Hold on. Could being around these non-native EMFs all the time be causing my nervous system to feel dysregulated because I'm not around native, harmonious electromagnetic fields as frequently as our ancestors were? I think that is like it's massively huge. Overlooked. That's one thing. And then this is another one that kind of just popped in, and I don't know if there is something to this, but okay, the way I've come to understand my cosmology is that everything is ultimately mind, and like ultimately mind of like in a sort of sound aspect. Like if you read the Bible, in the beginning of it was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right? So like the power of sound is spoken word. So when you're comparing like Scandinavian countries to more Latin countries, what are the differences in the language? Latin American countries and the more like like love languages, those types of languages that are spoken, they're more flowy in the way that they are. They're able to move, and sort of, when I think of flowy, I think of water, and water is like expressing. They express their emotions. They don't hold it in. Whereas the very Germanic-centric languages tend to be more rigid. And there's something about that with the spoken word sort of imprinting on them culturally to be more that way.
I agree, because I feel it. It's interesting because there's high and low German also. And so again, I have lots of connections in Austria. I could listen to them all day long because it's so soft, but I'm also hanging out with regulated Austrians. Yeah. Right. So that's the other element in there, is it could also be the people. Whereas, I can sometimes be startled in Vancouver hearing various Asian languages being hit at me in different directions. I'm technically have Asian, so it's not a thing. It's just like, whoa, that's a
You're
little...
not racist here.
Yeah, let's just be clear. Didn't want to say it. But I was just away for 3.5 weeks in Austria, hearing the tone of lower speaking, and that one could say maybe it's just repressed. I don't know. And then I land in the Vancouver airport, and I'm just being cut with all this languages. Like, oh my God, my system isn't used to this right now. And of course it's fine, but you kind of have a little bit of a startle.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is, so I agree. I mean, what an interesting topic to dive into a bit more.
I would rather not go there with you right now because I want to go into so many other things, but that is maybe
you have to
part
find
two.
an evolutionary linguist or something.
That would be really cool. Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah. But there's something to that.
I agree.
The thing that I want to go into next is sort of what makes us different. You've alluded to it a few times between us and animals. And I've brought this up on a number of episodes. And I think it goes without saying at this point, when a gazelle is chased by a lion and it finally gets to a space where it knows for sure that it is safe, the gazelle will shake violently. And I think we've come to understand that is the gazelle releasing the traumatic nature of that event that it is started to store in its tissues. It's releasing it, right?
I would say its survival physiology is resetting.
Okay.
I would never use the term I rarely use that term for humans, but in that case, their lower brain is not making them think about it. They are just releasing the shake from the chase, and they're trying to get away, right? So that is a release of their survival physiology. They're not traumatized though.
Yeah.
They would be traumatized if that were to happen, and then they be put in a cage.
This is what I was going to ask actually.
Okay.
Does that same mechanism happen to animals that are, and this is kind of a two-part question, animals that are raised in captivity or animals who are not raised in captivity but then are brought into captivity? So meaning that when they were raised as animals, they were raised as naturally as animals are, right?
Yeah.
But then later on in their life brought into captivity. Does that same thing happen?
I can't answer that with certainty scientifically, but having been around animals, I would say if you have an animal that has been in the wild and then they are put and caged, they become more like us.
Do you think they also at some level become sort of self-aware like us? Because you think about a domesticated dog versus a wild dog, for example, right? My dog has personality. It does. It totally has personality. And I don't know if that means that it's self-aware, but relative to a dog in the wild, and I'm not saying dogs in the wild don't have personality, but
it's
relative
less likely.
That, right.
Yeah, it's less likely. No, wild is, I do think that wild is different because they are not, I see there's also a difference because there's a lot of Instagram accounts I follow because it's fun where these dudes are living with lions.
Yeah.
And it's that's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. But they've shifted because there's still this mammalian connection, but they've been domesticated. And so I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. But domesticated animals, cats and dogs, when they're given a healthy environment, they're like humans, but they're also not because they're never going to learn how to feed themselves if they're inside a house.
So it is that higher mind, though, that separates us from animals.
Oh, 100. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, I don't think we need to touch on that too much because I've covered that in other episodes. Actually, briefly touch on it as much as you want to.
Well, I mean, I believe in a soul.
Yeah.
Some people will say animals have souls. I can't verify that. I don't know if anyone's tried to study that. I don't know how you would study that. But the soul piece is different. I am not up to speed on my biological, evolutionary, up-to-date research. But from what I know, last time I checked, we still don't know what that, we just still don't know what that missing link is from, again, I'm terrible.
Assuming any of that's true anyway.
Exactly. Right. I think that is the difference. We don't realize how powerful this higher brain is.
Yeah.
And there isn't an acceptance of where that higher brain came from a general perspective. So do I believe that there's a missing piece to the story? Of course.
Yeah.
But it's something I don't touch on because that is hard for people to comprehend, that we weren't just from the sea.
Yeah.
Right? But if I think about how diverse we are and what this brain has created, it's like, yeah, this is not of Earth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I know we know,
or maybe it possibly is, and this is just we are the stewards
something
of the
new.
divine, right?
It's very possible.
Right.
I think divinity is a big piece of this, definitely.
Yeah.
So but then we're given this prized jewel possession of the human neocortex. We think we understand it, but we are nowhere, in my opinion, nowhere close to understanding it. And I also think until we are all more regulated as a human species, we will never be able to agree on the diversity of where this conversation can go as to what is this human
the power
brain.
of this thing.
Because we know of supernatural stuff that happens. We all know someone who's got psychic capacity,
100%.
who's seen telekinesis, who's, all these things. Like,
I've talked about it on so many episodes. I've seen it myself. It's incredible.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe, and this is the thing, I've never been someone who's been skeptical of most things. It's just like, oh yeah, that makes total sense.
Our buddy Yerasimos,
yes,
he was skeptical, and he was with me when we watched two kids read blindfolded.
You're kidding.
He watched, and I remember like seeing his face, like he's like, dude, this changed my life. I'm like,
I'm gonna have to ask him about that.
Yeah, you should ask him about it.
that.
You should absolutely ask him about it. So nonetheless, we have it though, irrespective of where it came from. We have it, and so how does that typically play out when it comes to processing an event?
I mean, I don't have an answer for that because everybody's going to be different. I think it depends on. Okay, I'm going to give a totally different answer to this.
Great, that's fine.
Often when I'm trying to teach someone new or a student who's training how this is, I'm like, think of a formula. So I've got to go math here. So you've got a formula. It's an algorithm. You're trying to solve for X. You're trying to find a solution. So you're trying to process the event. But you don't know you might not even know what the variables are in that formula. So how do you solve this event, solve for X, when A, you don't even know what those variables are that you're working with? So maybe you do. Maybe you understand that, yeah, my mom had blah, 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 and my dad had this, 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 and I was preemie, and we didn't have enough food, and I'm dealing with early trauma. Or maybe there was a lot of physical abuse or sexual abuse. Maybe I have a really high ACE score. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's 15, right?
10.
10.
Well, maybe they've added 5.
I think they've added some.
Have
anyway,
they?
But I have all except 2. So
well, there you go.
Yeah, I have a very high.
You're doing very well, my dear. You're doing very well.
It's so funny because, like, I all things considered, when I think of like what I've been through in my life, I'm like, damn, I am doing fucking very well considering.
And you're young, right? So you've got a long way to keep working on this. So, I think of it always formulaically because you need to know a little bit about what the variables are that you're working with, because one person might not need to shake to go back to the Impala to heal their trauma. If they haven't had severe shock trauma, been attacked, it might not be possible. Might not be needed. But if they did have those shock traumas of being attacked or having a severe impact due to a car accident or something like that, they might have that variable of there is stored fight, flight, and shock patterns like in the bones, in the tissues that need to release. Other people might just have this immense sense that the world is dangerous. We're all going to die. Nobody is to be trusted, and I have to be suspicious of everything. That is a whole other type of work that has to be done with that person. That person is not, in my opinion, from my experience, is not going to be helped by going to a trauma release class or doing a breathwork session or getting in a cold plunge, right? It's going to actually, if anything, fracture their system more. So this is where, like, to really understand what has to happen, you need to understand quite a bit of the theory, hopefully in a fun way. And that's what I teach. But because if you don't know, what'll happen is, let's just say you were told, yeah, you should go to this breathwork session. And by the way, I got nothing against breathwork if it's done therapeutically and it's meant for a certain purpose. But to say, go to this session to heal your trauma and stimulate your vagus nerve, it's ludicrous.
When you said the theory, were you alluding to polyvagal theory there?
That, and also because polyvagal theory is really just how the autonomic nervous system has evolved from primitive to more mammalian.
Okay, let's put a pin in that to continue on this.
Yeah. In terms of what has to happen with that person, they might need to learn how to feel their body. Because we assume that people know how to feel their body, but most people don't. A person needs to know that there might be trapped memories in their body. This is why people will say, I got triggered, or I had a flashback. So there's an element of education so that, let's just say that person is at that session. It doesn't have to be breathwork. It could be anything that is more mind-body. And all of a sudden they have this pain in their hip, or they feel a burning in their eye, or they feel dizzy, or they feel like they want to punch the air. If they don't understand what that is, one of two things happen. They ignore it because they don't think it's important, so they bypass. Or they feel this thing and they think something must be wrong with me. Because everybody else is sitting clear and simple and breathing, and I feel like I need to explode. So when a person doesn't have that base level understanding of what could possibly be burgeoning out of their nervous system and this dysregulation, you run the risk of them thinking, I'm broken, this is wrong, this isn't for me. And it isn't for them, because if they haven't been taught there might be something that comes up in this, then you're missing a piece of the puzzle. So
if it's a breathwork practitioner, for example, because I've been in some where it felt like what I would imagine, because I've never done ayahuasca, an ayahuasca experience would be. And in this case, this breathwork practitioner did say, like, this is a very, very, very individuated thing. Some of you may not need to release. Some of you may scream. Some of you may laugh. Some of you may cry. Some of you may just sit silently, and all of it is fine. Whatever comes up for you individually, don't worry about what's happening to other people. This is your experience.
Yeah. Were you able to stick with that?
This is where it's hard in a group context, right? Like, and that's why I've said personally, if I were to ever do ayahuasca, which I've never felt called to until recently, and then it's sort of starting to dwindle again, like where I don't really feel called to, I would only do it with me and just
one person,
the shaman.
Yep, you're smart. No, and I think this comes back to what we were talking about with different culture, because you're in a sea of strangers, essentially, at that class. You don't realize, like, another term that Stephen Porges coined is neuroception. So it's the perception of not only danger, but safety. If you have never really gotten into these things that we've been talking about, you might not have ever considered that you actually don't feel safe in the world. Because you've overrode, you've had to go to school, you've had to go to university, you've had to sit at Christmas dinner. You don't want to do these things, but you do it. You don't realize how crafty you are at being okay and not being okay at the same time. So then you get a person in a class like this, and I think that's great that the teacher said that, but it's in some ways lip service, because the moment the autonomic physiology starts to bubble, you are that cheetah or you are that gazelle, and you've got humans around you, and you don't know, and let's just say someone does scream, that can freak people out. Maybe someone starts crying. That could freak them out. Maybe they were told, you never cry. Don't cry. Crying's bad. Maybe someone starts speaking in tongues. I don't know. And they're like, that person's
satanic ritual abuse trauma.
And then it's like, oh my God, what's happening there? And it kind of becomes this strange, like, I mean, we could make a fun video with this, like all these things popping up. If you haven't really done your work to be able to disconnect from that, but not shut down in your own body, you see how that could be very difficult. Like, if you get triggered by something in that class, it happens within a second, not even a second, right? If you're chopping vegetables at your kitchen table and you're wearing no socks and you drop your knife, what happens?
Yeah.
You don't even think. That's the autonomic nervous system protecting you. That is a procedure written at that peripheral nervous system level. You don't have time to think. The leg pulls back. So if you're in that class and you're having your own experience and you have 20, 30, God, some classes are bigger, people, 80 people having their own experience, it's kind of like a cacophony of expressions. And if you haven't really figured out how to stay present, differentiated would be the real word,
Yeah.
differentiated in yourself. And that is them. This is me.
Yeah.
I've been teaching classes for a long time, trauma-based classes, Feldenkrais-based classes with people who are highly advanced. And even in a group of 16 people, it takes a lot of work to contain that energy.
Yeah.
And so I think, and again, generalizing, my sense, Alec, is a lot of these classes, people are pushing out of, well, they're not even in their own window of tolerance. That's a whole other story. They're in a false window of tolerance for the most part. If you have dysregulation, you're not in a real window of tolerance. And so what's occurring is you are just managing the stuff that you're seeing. And if you're managing what's outside, you are not doing your own work.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Totally makes sense.
Okay.
I feel like that's where, and I do, this is a good segue into the like next topic I want to get into is like meditative practices and any other like techniques, if you will, but specifically focus on meditation first. And what I was going to say is, I think in this context, meditation previous to this event could have been a very helpful tool in order to really, really go inward. Now, there's a big asterisk there.
Yes.
And this is sort of a question. Because you were nodding when it comes to meditation right there. So like, again, with that asterisk, and this is the question. How do you differentiate, let's focus on meditation first, between a practice or a tool in using it to get more deeply into your being versus disassociate from your being and just perpetuate or never actually address what's underneath? I think you get what I'm asking, right?
Of course I do.
Okay.
It's your intention in using that tool. So, and so then we even go one level down. If someone doesn't understand what having an intention is with a practice, then we have a whole other thing to deal with.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with meditation, but why are you meditating? As one of my mentors would say, meditation is very powerful and consciousness is a strong technology. And we have to be very careful with it. And I don't mean like I'm conscious and alert, like the training of our consciousness.
The power of our thought energy when directed at something.
Yes.
Yep.
And I am not perfect in this, by the way. Like I can screw up things because I have strong intention and energy and I have to be very careful and I'm still figuring that out.
Have you ever heard the phrase, the more powerful the being, the more cunning the mind?
Yes.
Yeah, it's that.
So I'm going to break it down. So our higher consciousness, in terms of we just think about the brain, not the field that's out there. I know that's there, but just thought. It is not able to clip over at a good, strong level, if we think of like an engine really working well, when that autonomic nervous system physiology is still in survival stress. I mean, a car is a good analogy. Like you can have an amazing Ferrari, but if you're not taking care of the cylinders and the oil and it's got good fuel and all the things, it's not going to work the way it's made. You put someone in that car who doesn't know how to drive. Think about Pretty Woman. I mean, it's the classic, right?
Right.
You're going to jar, you're going to pop the clutch, you're going to stall the thing. It's going to actually make the car break down because you're not driving it properly. And you don't have the essence on how to drive that car properly. So when I think of the human brain, but the physiology, if your physiology is not going into deep rest digest every single night when you go to sleep, and you live your day fearful of ventral vagal social engagement, to go back to what the nervous system is, if you are constantly floating in fight, flight, and high tone dorsal shutdown of the parasympathetic, it's like you got bigger fish to fry. Because when those things are lighting up, demanding attention, because it's saying danger, 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 and you're trying to use the Ferrari the higher brain, one could say, well, is it going to hurt, Irene? Yeah, I've done enough work to say, yeah, that can hurt. It'll hurt.
When you say meditation, things like this,
it will not get you forward if you have these base level survival mechanisms running the ship, driving the front of the bus. And it's really interesting. Like, it's less now. I wrote an article in 2015. I can't remember the exact title, but it's like, I predicted that the mindfulness bubble is going to burst. And like, there's going to be a bursting of this mindfulness trend. And I compared it to the stock market crash of 2008. I used The Big Short as a visual. Because at the end...
What's the main character in that
Steve
again?
Carroll.
Okay.
I forget his name, but at the end, he's like, why is everybody walking around like it's a fucking Enya video?
Yeah.
Like, the market's going to crash, and nobody would believe him.
Yeah.
The market's going to crash because he could see this trend.
So you're like him. What's your prediction now?
My prediction is that I think enough people have bursted because I've talked to enough people who have had horrific ayahuasca experiences.
Yep.
I've had people who have done vagus nerve stimulation and they've had seizures afterwards.
Holy shit.
I've had people who have gone into breathwork sessions and come out in chronic pain and autoimmune flare. I mean, I've heard it all. And so my sense is this has happened more in the last 10 years, because I wrote that in 2015, so 9 or so years. I think that's right.
Yep.
There's been enough people that have had bad experiences that I don't get stressed. I don't get flack when I talk about this, whereas 10 years ago, people didn't like that article. But what has happened is I think people have become so attached to, I need to be a meditator. It gives it's like a badge. I meditate. And again, like I'm saying, if you want to meditate and you are aware of these things and you're aware when you're bypassing, you're aware that when you come out of your meditation, you actually feel more vibrant and more whole and connected versus bypassed and shut down and numb, then that's great. Most people don't have that distinction yet.
Can I share my experience?
I would love
Because I know the difference between the two very well. I used to not.
Good.
And I still do this to some degree sometimes, especially if I'm like in a hurry.
Yeah.
There'll be times where emotions will well up inside of me and I know they're there.
Yep.
And I know that, okay, just the way I'm constituted, in order for me to really feel this, I'm going to need like an hour or 2 hours. It's going to be a thing.
Yep.
Like I'm going to have to go be a thing. But I'm a dad. I run a business that ironically speaks on all this stuff. So it's so funny when I'm like, well, shit, I need to cry really bad right now, but I have a freaking podcast today.
Yeah. And everybody else.
Yeah, right. I know. But my point is like, I can feel the difference of, I practice Qigong.
Yep.
I practice Qigong pretty frequently. And what I do love about Qigong relative to other types of meditation, and this is why I like it, I won't say it's better or worse, but meditation tends to be here in the mind. For those listening, I'm pointing to the head, right? Qigong is getting you in your body. You focus on the dantians, you focus on getting into your body, your organs, breathing into yourself. You're shaking and moving a lot. You're doing some movements depending on the type of practice you do. Point being, it's a very body-based thing for me. But even with that, if I'm in a hurry and I know I have emotions, but I need to like be okay enough for a podcast or something, a speaking engagement, something like that, I just do a quick Qigong, and that is like 100% a bypass in order to just be okay enough for the time being. And then I'll either have to deal with it later or I won't. And then it'll start making me feel stressed. And then my thing is I get lower back, right?
Tight.
Tight in my lower right back. And then sometimes get rashes on my face. And the difference is, in the other context, when I do Qigong, I feel incredible. I feel so aware, so sharp, so inside of myself, so in love with being. And in a way, like, if someone brings up a traumatic thing for me, I can look at that and genuinely look at it and be like, wow, I'm grateful for that. Or if it triggers me, I'm like, wow, this is triggering me. And I can feel it as it happens. There's no delay of like trying to figure it out mentally of like, oh, what do I do? It's, I just naturally start feeling emotions if I need to. And then it passes and I'm gone. And that's the, I think, spectrum and difference between the two. Is that the experience that you have come to understand? Okay.
Well, I mean, I always say to people, if the choice between doing a deep breath session, like taking some calming breaths or doing a quick meditation practice, if that's the difference between you hitting your kid, then do it.
Yeah.
If you have not, again, this isn't about, there's no shame in this. It's like if you're still working on this stuff and you get triggered and you freak out and you need to do some tapping, or you need to contain yourself, or you need to have a cup of something, or like do it. But, you know, again, it's that consciousness of I need to do this right now to chill out. So yeah, I think again, this goes back to just the history of humans. Like we're not supposed to be doing, well, maybe we are supposed to be doing this right now.
I don't know.
Who knows? Are we here? You know, are we supposed to be doing this? I think we have to, because we're trying to clean up the stuff that we haven't been aware of, and we've just been coasting through the world. You know, to take Bucky Fuller's, you know, we're on this spaceship just going through space. It's like, what is happening? And I think, you know, the thing with Qigong, because I actually have one of my co-teachers is an expert in Qigong and in Chinese medicine and Tai Chi, and it blends beautifully with the nervous system work because there's movement and it's going into the visceral organs, and there's sound and there's orienting with the eyes, and it's energetic, and there's something to focus on because there's systems of this is the this and this is the that. So you're also given like a little bit of a script that helps us when we have a higher brain that needs direction.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas a lot of the work that I would teach is considered a little bit more abstract because I'm trying to bring it back to like the baby. Like this is what a baby needs. And we're trying to do that as adults. We're not reparenting ourselves, but we're trying to go back to those building blocks of how do we build up a healthy nervous system. So no, I mean, this is
I love that you said that too, Reese. I really think she would like Laura because a lady that I just interviewed, she does what's called neurogenic Qigong.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Which is all about helping to release. I should put you guys in touch. It's really cool.
That sounds cool.
Okay, so do you feel complete with that topic, the meditation piece? Is there anything else you want to touch on there? Or just techniques in general, EFT, MDR, all these things?
Well, the thing is, you know, we could have a conversation about all those, but it comes back to
the intention.
The intention, and is this what the system needs in the moment?
Yeah.
And from my experience, people need way more baseline foundational work than they realize. And they've gotten a little kind of, you know, enamored with like, I have to be this person. Or again, it comes back to labels.
Yes.
Like, can you just be a human that has a family and needs to eat, clean the house, do some work, make some money, and be good in the world? You know, the 10 Commandments go a long way, right? When you really look at the basics of that, it's like, why do we have to say, oh, I am a this person and I am a that person? And I do think some of that comes back to, because I've seen as students get more regulated, they say, I feel more human and I feel more connected to spirit, but I'm not doing it consciously. And then they just like, I'll be honest, a lot of my students are like, yeah, I really don't meditate anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't need to go to this anymore. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm content just following my impulses,
Life is spiritual.
Getting some exercise in, you know, eating good food, being with my people, and that's it.
Yeah. You know, it's what comes up for me is like this intersection between the holistic health movement with the freedom movement, with the like consciousness movement, with the truther movement, all kind of one thing. A lot of that tends to come with some new ageisms and sort of taking on identities rather than like being a naturalist, if you will. Like life is fundamentally spiritual itself. This is spiritual just as much as me eating a freaking bowl of cereal, or like even the process of me being stressed out and having to figure it out with my kids, my kids scream, you know, like all of it is spiritual, not this specific act is spiritual.
And I think that's where, because there's so much tension around, I know religion and spirituality are different, but people kind of put them into the same pot. Again, I sound like a broken record, but when you have that regulation and that connection to self, And that happens through connecting with the environment. That's a big piece that gets missed in a lot of the somatic influencer practices that I see. It's all about just the body and just sensations. But if you really know, say, Peter's lineage, it's about human experience and about connection and safety. How you get to that is so different for each person because we weren't, here, I'll say it this way. There are deer in Texas, I'm assuming. There are deer in Canada.
Yeah, lots.
There are deer in Europe and all, like when those little babies come out of mom, there is no manual for her on how to raise them. It just happens. We could do the same comparison with bears, other mammals. It's in them what to do with their young. It's so simple when you really bring it back to that. So then you have the human mammal. And I often say, and I've written about this, there is a right way to raise a human baby. Now, I don't mean in terms of the art and music you expose them to, but like that basic connection of safety, feeding, teaching them right from wrong, don't get into trouble, care. Like, if we could just get that right and realize that that's what we need, the higher brain, so this is kind of answering your question about the meditation piece and all the other things. If we could just get that right, we would be realizing a situation where we don't need to think about the things that we need to practice because we would have baseline regulation from the start. But this is the part that's so difficult because we pride ourselves in diversity and being unique. And I'm not like that. I'm this person. I'm that person. And then we slap on these labels and here we are.
Yeah.
Talking about this.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
It fascinates me because there's so many ways to look at it, but it is, I like to try to just always go back to the baseline. Like, what didn't you get when you were young?
And I want to touch on all that too, especially like towards the end. I have one more question as it relates to the framework, if you will, rather than the how-to. And it relates to the mind, especially because what you said, when it comes to these various techniques and practices, meditation, EFT, EMDR, and all these different techniques that are out there, there seems to be just like endless techniques nowadays. And I've done several of them. I've done meditative reparenting. I've done EFT. I've done EMDR. I've done a number of things that related to some somatic release techniques. And several of them for me didn't do anything. Some of them were helpful to a point. But I have sort of come to the conclusion that in many ways, it just requires that we simplify all this and just feel it to heal it. That's what I've come to understand. And I had that through direct experience when I did my water fast and I wasn't able to cope with food. I wasn't able to cope with any of these other things. Yes, I had, I did Qigong every day, which in some contexts during my water fast were great because it was helping me go into me. And sometimes it was to avoid a feeling. But then when I finally got to a point around day 12 or 13 of like just sitting and feeling and doing it, which was scary as fuck at first.
Sure.
I realized afterwards, like, oh, these things don't actually have as much power over me as I attributed to them. And all I needed to do was just sit here and allow them to flow through me. And then I feel automatically better. Now, am I, not prone to triggers or, stressors and things like this anymore? No, that's not what I'm going to say. But I will say that, and my wife would agree with this, that I am a changed man after that experience,
That's
after
great.
just sitting and feeling. So I threw a lot there in that sort of, I don't even know what the question is, but yeah, respond, por favor.
When was that?
This was in 2023.
Oh, so recent.
Yeah.
Okay. So
August 2023. Yeah.
I think, again, this comes back to that algorithm or formula. You're your own person. You had experiences before this that gave you context for being with things. So that's one piece, right? So you had the capacity and probably the resource. And I don't think there's anything wrong if you're feeling a strong sensation and you get up to do some Qigong. That might have been a smart move because that helped with it. Whether you bypassed it, anyone's guess, who knows? But it sounds like overall it was a really positive experience. It can be oversimplistic to say it's just about being with the sensation, Because again, if a person hasn't learned how to be in sensation, which is in the body, they might not know what to do with that. And that's where you get into this risk of shutting down, going into that freeze shutdown response, or getting into overactivation and going into more fight flight. And again, depending on the people or the person, you can trigger and oversensitize to the point where someone is not able to get out of that reaction. And
it's perpetual ripping off the Band-Aid at that point.
Yeah. In the somatic world of Peter Levine and Bob Scare, who I quoted earlier, we would call this a kindling response. It's like you fire, you know what a kindling, it's like it gets it, it's dry, it's quick. But if a person doesn't have the capacity to slow down the nervous system responses that like domino effects ramp up that pain or ramp up that thought process, you can end up in psychosis, which some people do end up in when they do certain things that just blow them up too much, or you can end up in an autoimmune flare because again, it connects to that autonomic nervous system physiology. If you can't contain and come back into some baseline state, it doesn't even have to be regulation, but just a bit more calm, if we use that word, it's like a runaway train that you like, and some people will take it years to recover if they've done some of these sitting meditations, fasts, and not everybody has that effect, but some people do, and so you just can't predict.
And I didn't mean specifically in the context of having to do a fast.
Sure.
I meant just the event of like feeling the feelings.
Yeah, it's oversimplistic to say it's all about sensing and just being with it and letting those things pass, because sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But you're right. If a person has the capacity to sense an intense sensation, which often has a connection sometimes to some emotional piece, some past experience, or if it's early trauma, there will be no emotion because it's pre-verbal. And that's the part that can be tricky, because a person will be sitting there having a nice old time, and then all of a sudden their heart is like at 100 miles a minute. There's no memory, there's no emotion. They feel terror and they freak out because they don't know what's going on. That is a very, very classic response of an early or developmental trauma pattern coming up, because that in utero infant, that child is not making sense of where they are in the world.
Right. And you may not have a conscious memory of it, because that was the next side, two more mind-related ones.
Yeah, there's no conscious memory of it.
Yeah.
It's somatic. And so when people throw out the word, we're going to do somatic work, it's like, do you really know where you can go with that? And having a spike in heart doesn't just necessarily mean that you're uncomfortable. This could be something really old that you didn't even know was in your system, because you're not going to remember it. And chances are your parent doesn't remember it because maybe they're not around or they were not aware of the situation.
What about multi-generational on top of that, though,
yes.
too? Like epigenetically, like you're talking about
transgenerationally.
Yeah, transgenerational.
Yep, transgenerationally. Yeah, you will have, they've done studies with post-Holocaust, post 9/11 children that were in those mothers, like even though their lives were good and there was no stress, no warfare, they have higher, I think it is cortisol levels just naturally. So what is that? Is it like the spooky, memories in the mom, or is it that her physiology is still dysregulated?
Yeah.
My sense is it's mostly the latter, because it comes back to how can she attune to herself and attune to little one. And even if she loves and cares, as I said earlier, there'll be this edge of something's not safe. I need to be on guard. Gabor Mate talks about that a lot in his books around his upbringing in the Holocaust time, right?
Yeah.
His book on ADD is one of the best books I've read on that. So I don't know if I answered that element.
Well, yeah, I would say like another piece of that, though, is I'm thinking even like great-grandpa, great-great-grandpa, like if they never did the work to heal and deal and bring them their nervous systems back into regulation and harmony, then could we possibly be dealing with that as well? And I just discussed this on another episode, and I don't remember the study. I should have gone and looked up, but it's like a study that was done with rats where they expose rats of one generation to this certain stimulus that would cause them to like lock up, and then multiple generations later, the same rats were exposed to that stimulus without the actual shock associated with it, and they still
They had that
the reaction
effect
as well.
Yeah, that survival.
It's like a genetic memory or something
It
like
is.
that.
I think, I don't know if this was the same study, but the seminal work was in Canada, I think at the University of Toronto with Michael Meany, and it's called like the Meany rat experiment. And they did something similar to that. And yes, that showed that it perpetuated.
Yeah.
The thing is, a rat is a mammal, but it's also in a very controlled environment.
This is what I was going to go back to.
The rat can't go and like learn to like sit and feel. And the rat isn't going to go talk to the other rat and go, hey, how you feeling today? Do you need a cup of tea? Right. They're alone.
Yeah. It's also a rat that's not in its natural environment, though, too.
It is not.
See, that's the other thing.
It's not.
Because that's where my mind goes with some of these studies, too.
Yep.
Is first off, it doesn't represent what happens in nature, but what does that look like with us being domesticated as well and our capacity to deal with these things?
Well, the things with these rats, I mean, I was in academic situations where there were rats and mice being used in experimentation. Those are not out on the street rats.
Right.
They're being bred specifically for scientific research.
Yeah.
So even that, like, not that we would do this, but like, what if we just got some rats that were like in the sewer pipes of, underground Manhattan and they would have a different resiliency to these rats being born in a lab.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that too.
Those rats in New York City have seen some shit.
Yes, they have. I just remembered the Meany study. It was not there. The study he did was on licking. So it was about nurture. That's why the study was so good. It was about how they eventually connect rats and pups and kittens. Like they get licked. That's how they know where they are. That's the connection with mom. Like immediately when these little ones come out, they're licked.
Yeah.
Right. And I can't remember, but I think they like deprived them of that and showed the consequence of that.
Wow.
I think, please don't quote me on this, but
Yeah,
that's his body of work. And it comes back to the human. Were they picked up when they were when they, were they fed when they needed food? And I forget what your question was.
No, it relates because then that was possibly the triggering mechanism that led to that individual being dysregulated.
Yes.
And they didn't have the tools, and then they had kids, and then those kids were born feeling dysregulated. And those kids, and it could pass all the way down because then it creates a perpetual cycle of dysregulated people that then incur more traumatic events because they're attracted to it, but then they also do things to other people, so then they carry guilt and shame, and then it's just passed down generation to generation to generation, just like that, because one person was dysregulated in some way.
What that saying, misery loves company, right? I believe, and I'm, for the record, I don't look at research papers because I got turned off of academia when I was in it.
I love you for that.
I went into that, man, and I'm like, something isn't, I actually was just talking to my husband about this. I'm like, something's not right. And this was before I had any awareness of anything. This was before The Matrix came out, right? And I just knew something was wrong.
Wow.
I'm like, I don't want to be in this. I like some of my grads to their fun. We go out and we go hiking and camping and we drink and have fun. But it's like the core of this institution feels rotten. And because I knew the fighting around grant money and this person gets this lab and this person doesn't get that and da-da-da-da-da. And it was just, I hated it. So I left it after I did one
Good for you.
research study. Thank you. But I was talking to him about that because it's like, people want those studies, but I know from just being in life and seeing thousands of people, my convincing piece is it comes back to that ventral vagal, because that's the myelination piece. That's how we've learned how to connect, how we've learned how to soothe. So if you have grandpa, grandma from 10 generations back who never got that because they were born and their mother died because of whatever, little one is hardly being taken care of, but enough that they stay alive. Because we know if a child, like orphanage studies, a lot of kids die.
Yep.
Right? Because they're given food. They're fed, they get water, they're changed, they're clean, but they have no connection. So it comes back to Bruce Perry's book, Born for Love, and that empathy. It's actually not empathy, it's attunement, in my opinion. It's attuning, what does this little one need? So you take that, it's like that game, Telephone.
Yep.
Where you say something into a person's ear and then it goes around a circle, and then the person at the end says it is nothing what that person said. I see what's happening with the generations of trauma being passed down like that, because it's not going to be like it was 10 generations ago in whatever year. It's going to be tweaked and changed. The good news, because there is good news, is I've seen this in my husband, because he has a kid, it can change in one generation. Like you can change, speaking to you, your entire lineages of trauma with your kids and how you choose to connect with your wife and what you decide to show them or not show them. The buck can stop right there.
Yep.
And that's what's so cool because of this higher brain.
Yes.
You can't do that if you traumatize a bunch of dogs and leave them to fend for themselves in a kennel. It won't work. But because of choice, this comes back to the free will piece, right? A lot of biologists will not believe in free will. It's like, well, you can't make that statement if you don't understand that you actually can rewire and fully regulate and return regulation to a human. So they're not just an animal. Like, come on. Right? Sapolsky is known for that. He doesn't believe in free will, at least the last I checked. So it's like, no, yeah, you don't have free will if you are stuck in dysregulation. I agree with that. But if you can get out of that, get regulation on board through higher consciousness, because you need your higher, this is where the Feldenkrais work comes in. It's higher brain. Feldenkrais is actually not somatic, oddly. It's higher brain through the body. And so if you can do that, you can stop that stuff.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
So I want to get into that, and I want to get into some of the how to behave with children who have already been traumatized, or like, okay, you're about to be a parent, or your kids are really young. I want to get into some of that. I have one more mind-related question.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try to piece together like what's in my mind right now, ironically. So I've come to understand, again, as I said earlier, that this realm it's a mind-based realm, right? Like there is the one mind that is God, and we are all individuated aspects of it. And that could be totally wrong, but that's the way I've come to understand it, irrespective, right? Okay. So if you look at the work of like Veda Austin, Masaru Emoto, as it relates to water, I'm sure you've looked into that as well. And given that we're water-based beings, water permeates all facets of this reality. It sort of makes sense of like this law, quote, law of attraction, which I don't like the law of attraction, but the law of resonance, you could say, right? Like, what are you in resonance with?
Yeah.
And what that is ultimately getting at is that our thought energy, when harnessed and directed consistently, can bring about material results in reality. And it makes sense. And the reason I brought up Veda Austin Masaru Emoto is because that is a perfect example of that, right? Like Veda has repeatedly shown that our focused thought energy, and how I relate focused thought energy to unfocused thought energy, is thought energy with emotion attached to it, when pointed at something, can bring about actual change in water, which permeates all facets of this reality. So one could deduce from that our individual and collective thought energy can absolutely bring about real change in reality in real time. Of course, there's been studies where people have meditated without, unbeknownst to the this city, for example, and the crime rates in that city have dropped, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm getting at here is you bring in the work of someone like Dr. Joe Dispenza, right, who would say that you don't need to go back and redo any of those things. You just need to orient your own thought energy to bring about change in your being. And he doesn't speak about it in terms of water, but he nonetheless speaks about it in somewhat of the same way. You don't need to go back and redo any of the stuff. And I don't know where he stands in the nervous system, but he would say that it's just about refocusing your own thought energy. And what I've concluded is this, and I want you to tell me if Alec, no, that's stupid and you're wrong. What I've concluded is this. for people who have developed an incredible capacity through various spiritual lineages, whatever, to cultivate very strong thought energy and direct it and harness it, they may not need to do any of that stuff. Maybe. But it requires that you are a very, very strong, unique individual who has really cracked the code on how this realm works. And that is unique. Now, I say that while fully recognizing and believing that we all have that capacity, but we also live in this way where we're all conditioned. If we are all living as, I think, if history is correct, many of our ancestors were living, or living like the Kogi people in Colombia. I don't know if you're familiar with them. That's
another story.
Yeah, another story.
Okay.
I don't think we'll have time for that one. But then you may be able to do it at that level.
Yeah.
But for the overwhelming majority of people, that just does not work, especially because so much of this is subconscious, if you will. And I'm sure you would say that in a different way, but that's how I say it, subconscious. And yes, our thought energy is still incredibly powerful, but we still have a lot of deconditioning that needs to be done. So we're not at that level. So we can't just harness only the power of the mind. It requires that we do some other things first.
Yes.
Just yes?
Well, the interesting thing about Veda, I don't know her work specifically, but I know people who've interviewed her, and I was around when What the Bleep came out. So that's when I was exposed to Emoto and Dispenza, because I think he was in that one. I would love to know if the people that she had doing that were people random assignments.
Yeah, maybe it was like specifically regulated people.
Because even if you don't have someone regulated, but you have someone who understands that love is important and there's a difference between love and hate, and they can differentiate that, you're going to have a very different outcome than if you literally land in different parts of the world and try it with, this is where my science brain comes in handy. It's like, well, who was she using with that?
Well, knowing Veda,
right?
she typically associates with very like regulated, heart-based people.
That was my sense. And so if she's choosing those people, it's already biased.
Yeah.
Because you want to look at a broad spectrum of humans. It's not fair to say, well, this works, but well, that's working with someone who already has a level of understanding of the world and intention.
Yeah.
Is that going to work with someone who has never considered that they even have a brain? Because a lot of people don't consider that.
Right.
They also don't consider that they have guts and they have blood in their bodies. They're completely disconnected from their body. From my experience, if someone is not at least a little bit in tune with their biology, it is very hard for them to intend and manifest anything.
Yeah.
There might be instances where that's a fluke and that occurs, but I mean, my husband is a good example of this. I met him. He was working at a hot springs resort in Oregon at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, as idyllic as you could get, meditating all the time, soaking in natural springs in the cold community. But he was a mess. Like he had no idea that he had complex PTSD. He had no idea. He knew he had social anxiety, but he just thought that's how he was. And he had so much power to meditate and sit and not eat and all these things through he had more of a shamanic upbringing. But when I met him and we started to connect, and he's like, oh man, this is my missing piece. He had no clue what the next 7-10 years were going to bring, because he thought he was the man, at this place, because he was like the king of the castle. He was the best chef there. But no, he was a disaster, but he did have a strong mind. And when I met him, even though he had all this stuff, I didn't see that. I just saw his soul, right? So it comes back to, I do think that we can work with the mind, but to go back to Dispenza, trust me, I have conversations with people about his work. I've never been to his
One
things.
of his retreats or anything, yeah. I haven't either.
And I know that miracles can happen. I want to know what is happening to these people that say these things have happened. I want to see them 6 months later, a year later, are they just perfect or not?
Yeah.
My experience would say probably not. Are they doing anything else?
Yeah.
to keep up that health.
Right. I think that's the question there is like, what are they doing after the fact?
I don't know. Like, it sounds a bit, one-sided, but I can't see that being enough to make these big shifts.
Yeah. And maybe they can in the instance, because this is what I think.
There's also the
that.
group effect, right?
That's what I was going to say. Like a strong, coherent field, like generated by a group with the right intention together.
I've read Lynn McTaggart's work and all that, and Anita Muraji and her story about healing cancer like in one night and kind of thing. And I believe that stuff happens.
Yeah.
I do think the distant studies that have done around prayer and all that are fascinating because it does show that it does have an impact.
Strong correlation at the least.
But exactly. Yeah. But what happens after that?
Yes.
So you can add a bolus to take a term from science into something and make a big ripple effect that's good. But then what happens?
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening right now with the current shift in the government here, right? I just did a long interview about what is missing from the Make America Healthy Again movement. It's wonderful, of course. But I know from being in fitness and nutrition, because I was also in nutrition before nervous system work, you could give someone all the great food in the world in their refrigerator. They're probably not going to know what to do with it. And they didn't make it happen to get there.
Right.
There has to be an internal drive. And also, FYI, all these metabolic things, illnesses, poor food choices, addiction, it comes back to your ability to sense your internal system. If you don't teach people that, you are going to screw that whole agenda up, if you want to call it that. And I'm like, oh boy, you guys are like missing key research. Not once have I heard trauma mentioned, childhood trauma. And we know that has to be addressed.
And I've come to the conclusion, I've said this on a number of episodes, that the overwhelming majority of dis-ease is, yes, nutrition matters, yes, vaccines matter. And I think like those types of things, living in an unnatural way, diminishes your capacity to process traumatic events. But it all comes back to, in my opinion, overwhelmingly, with some outliers, some form of trauma, or there is some foundation of trauma there.
100%. And I'll even go so far to say dysregulation of the nervous. I like to be specific because it is that dysregulation, that survival stress that is stored. That is the crux. Because when we say trauma, and like you said at the beginning, people are throwing that word out. I'm trauma informed. I'm a trauma specialist. It's like, okay, well, tell me what that is. Tell me what you understand about this. Right. Someone put me up on a stage with some of these people and throw questions at us. And let's see who gets it. It's kind of like, no, you got to look at all. I mean, we've been speaking for probably hours. It's like,
how long have we been going, actually, Reese? Nico, keep this on. This is fun.
2.5. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm good with that.
You were really good with that. My goodness. All right. Sorry. Keep going.
Actually,
are you good? Are you tired?
No, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. I think actually I can do that with time. It's really strange.
Yeah. That's incredible.
But back to what you were saying, I don't remember all the specifics. I do believe that the age of a soul also determines what a person can do in this lifetime to heal.
Like how many incarnations?
Yep.
Yeah. I could totally see that.
And it's something that I fully study. I started studying Brian Weiss's work, Many Lives, Many Masters, and all his books when I was actually in university.
Wow.
In academia. It was a great story. I actually had to go to the library to get a book, like a sciencey book. It was back in the day we had to write it down on a piece of paper and like walk to the library. And I'm in the stacks and I'm like, this isn't the right spot. Why am I like, what? And I'm looking at the number and I wrote the number down right. And right where this book was supposed to be, no shitting you, was Many Lives, Many Masters.
Wow.
It was in 2008. I was like, pull it out. And this is me. I'm like, oh, this is what's here. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I'd never, ever considered past lives.
Yeah.
I was raised Catholic. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's just like wasn't in the world, even though we talk about the Holy Spirit, right? And I don't practice Catholicism at all, but I was like, oh, interesting. I read that book in 2 nights.
Wow.
I just drank it up. And I'm like, whoa, this girl had like physical ailments. And each life that they went back into, the symptoms went away. Anyway, so I share that because, I'll meet people where they just get it. They just get it. And it doesn't mean that they're perfect, and it doesn't mean they've polished, but they're just there. And then others, I'm like, yo, you don't really get it, do you? And it's okay. I was on the plane coming here from Denver, and I'm like, had to write an article for today that went out. And the girl next to me, and this is not shaming her in any way. It's like, she's just playing Candy Crush, having a fun time. I'm like, God, that's cool. And she was nice, and we smiled, and she had a little anxious, like I could feel her dysregulation. I'm like, that's cool. Right. And so again, it's like there's like this, you mentioned a second ago, the truther movement and all this, there's like almost this like trying to force down people's throats how bad you are. It's like, you're just doing exactly what the other people are doing.
Exactly.
And so there is this element of grace and knowing not every single person is going to go to the level of depth that say, I will or you will. And it's not even about being okay with that. It's just like, like there's not even a word with it. It's like,
yeah.
Huh. Okay. Isn't that interesting?
I like that. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. All right, so given that we just addressed the mind, and I'm sorry I had like 10 questions in there when I kind of said I had one question related to the mind. It just is always so fascinating with me, again, because I look at it in terms of the nature of reality, but not in a very woo-woo sort of non-tangible way, but in a very tangible, like, oh no, our thought energy absolutely directs this. But that being said, what you stated there regarding Veda's stuff, for example, with, okay, what type of person were they? Were they attuned? Did they have some...
What's their history?
Yeah. What was their history? Did they have some greater capacity in their nervous system? If not, are they at least aware of these things? That's a really important question. And I look at that and I say yes to all of it, because I think in order to direct your thought energy, like you were saying, you have to have either deconditioned yourself in order to come back into coherence. So you are a strong, coherent field so that you can blast that outward to cause those sort of ripple effects through your biofield into the ether, impacting reality itself. Or you have to have been raised that way. And there's not a lot of us who are raised that way. So with that being said, I think this is a good time now to address kids in how we as parents, especially for those of us, let's start with this, who are either brand new parents, we have a brand new baby, or we are about to have babies. How do we address cultivating a greater tolerance in their nervous system and just general nervous system health?
Yeah. So I'm going to go real simple first. You got to see that baby as a little mammal. Like they need help. They are dependent on you. They are weak because they can't fend for themselves. And it's going to sound strange, but if you can just see that little person as a nervous system, of course they have a soul and a personality will come out. But if in those first 3 years, it's all about attuning to their physiological needs. That's it. Safety, food, connection, care, temperature regulation, cleanliness, routine. A lot of people think, oh, we don't need routine. That's too conditioned. It's like, no, actually, they do need some routine. Just like animals in the wild have routine.
Mm-hmm.
They're up with the sun. I mean, some obviously hunt at night, but when they're little, there's a routine and they're always with mom. They're always together, especially if there's a litter of them. So those are like the base level. Just think of your little one as this physiological being, because it is. They are. And they are primitive at that age. They're not some higher consciousness being yet. Like they haven't developed their motor skills, right?
Or at least they haven't integrated that higher consciousness
They
yet.
have, yeah. So that it's there, but like they can't speak it out yet.
Right.
They're not gonna.
I wonder what babies can really see too, though.
And they can sense. I mean, back to that element of the field, like they're resonant. And you want to just help them build their coherence.
They're so impressionable too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Oh, babies are so resilient," and it's like, no, they're malleable.
Yeah, that's a way better way of putting
it. They're
it.
not resilient at that age, right? Resilience is being able to make yourself scrambled eggs, toast, and clean up the kitchen afterwards,
right?
Without anybody telling you how to do it,
right?
Right? Whereas they are meeting the demands of what's around them, and they need to be taken care of. So there's nothing there. This whole, oh, you're going to spoil that kid if you pick it up too much. No. Like you have to pick them up when they're unwell, when they're distressed. But you also, if they're just having a happy time on the floor or they're sleeping, leave them alone. Right. One of the things I always thought was so interesting when I would be around my girlfriends who had babies, which isn't recent, and you see it on like shows and you see it in airports and in restaurants, people will be with the baby and they're just constantly rocking it to death. Like, and the baby's not distressed. It's like, why are you doing that? And I remember picking up a friend's baby one day and the baby was so happy. We were looking at things outside and I just had it. Like I was holding my, a watermelon. And they were confused, Alec, because I wasn't doing the thing.
The baby was confused, or the
people, the adults.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I watched it, and then when I gave the baby back to the other, I was getting my hair cut, and so this person's baby was there, and it was kind of being passed around. And she was such a happy baby, and every other person had to keep bouncing her to death. I'm like, she's fine.
Yeah.
So I say that because it's like, if the baby isn't fussed, don't fuss over them, right? Just let the little one be content being held. So that's one thing. We've got this thing like they're going to be fussy, so we have to keep rocking them. It's kind of weird. Anyway,
yeah, it's like a preemptive thing.
It's a pet peeve of mine for whatever reason. If we think about so let's say people haven't had little ones yet, and I'll go more into during. I mean, depending on your age, is there a rush? 2-3 years of getting your nervous system and your regulation in check, getting in alignment with the partner you have, will make your life so much easier, because then you know what you need to do and there's no question about it because you're just being biological. And I have not raised my own biological kids, but my husband has. And even with all of his dysregulation, when he had a son with his first partner, he's like, it's an easy phase if you just attune to them. And she was really good at knowing that. She still had that instinct, even though she had all her own traumas. So that's cool. She's like, it's not that hard. It's tiring, without a doubt. You're helping build the most complex mechanism on this planet, in my opinion. So it's going to be hard in that you're going to be tired and you have to attune and attend, but it's actually quite simple when you break it down into that. They're in physiological distress, attune to them, meet their needs, get them out of physiological distress, back to baseline. That is going to teach them regulation. one thing with women, and I'm working with this with some of my students right now who have yet to have babies, is if you, as the female, can get open in your body and get coherent in your body and work on shock traumas, early traumas that might be holding down certain areas of your viscera and fascia. We talk about something called diaphragms in our work, not just the true diaphragm, but all the levels. They line up with the chakras, they line up with the glands and organs. When you've had a shock, when you've had terror, when you've been traumatized, when you've had dysregulation, these diaphragms shut, like they close up and the flow, the coherence stops.
Yeah.
So many, not just women and men, but women, if you're trying to get that baby out, you need to have open diaphragms from the top of the tentorium all the way down to the root. Many women will not realize how much tension they hold in their jaw, in their neck, in their heart, in their belly. And then, of course, that influences the pelvis. So getting work done, learning something like Qigong, getting some good osteopathic work, body work, movement work, trauma work, whatever, to open up. If a mother has like bowel problems, you want to get that in check because that shows that the baseline regulation is not there yet. Mm-hmm. And it's not just bowel, it's immune, health of the kidneys, all these things. The other thing that we haven't mentioned is anger, healthy aggression. That's like another 4 hours of talking. So I'm not going to go deep into it, but suffice to say,
I'm going to have you back on.
Okay.
Like 100%. I already have
I know where to go now.
That. Yeah.
But yeah, like, again, back to mammals. Anger is part of our natural mammalian emotion, along with fear, sadness, surprise, disgust, right? Like, it's in there. And if we can't get that healthy aggression out, and we know this through the work that Gabor Mate has done, it's like, it's just going to create so much bad stuff inside, if I'm really simple. Yep. And then when that kid is screaming and you're tired and you haven't dealt with your own, and you've got all this stored up anger, where do you think violence against infants starts?
100%.
It's not because you want to hurt your baby. Trust me, I've worked with adults who have abused their kids. They feel terrible about it. Terrible. Even if it's yelling. And it's like, it's because they don't have their own regulation on board. Comes back to that window of tolerance. A lot of people think they have a strong capacity, but then when that little one comes in, it is going to push all your buttons. And it's going to bring up your needs that weren't met. How are you going to care for this little one and give them everything they need if you weren't given everything you needed? I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? I didn't get it. And so if you don't have that, most people won't consciously know that they play that out. If you don't know that, you will. That's where the 100%. Where the cycle continues.
That's generational trauma, right there.
That's right there, right 101, right there. And yeah, okay, maybe your ancestors did brutal abuse to your grandparents, whatever, and all you're doing is yelling. Trust me, yelling at a child is just as, if not harder to work with, because there's no physical memory of the impact.
It's so interesting you say that, and I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but I had very different relationships with my mom and my dad.
Yep.
My dad was much more physical. Yep. Like there was a lot of physical stuff there, like punch in my face type of
violence.
Stuff. Yeah, violence. That was much easier to heal than the other side, the stuff coming from my mom. Much easier. And there was also yelling and stuff with my dad too.
You're accurate.
But that was much easier to address than the sort of, I don't want to say covert stuff, but stuff that wasn't as easy to latch onto like an event.
It's more venomous.
Yes.
And venom does what? It poisons you slowly.
Yes.
Right? And so that's the part that it's like, that's where the ACE study, while they do bring in emotional abuse, and again, maybe they've added 5 points. I haven't looked at that, but it's like, it's not gonna cover. You know, my husband has a great story because he grew up with violence from his dad's side and he had emotional abuse from his mother's side. It's quite common, actually. Yeah. And he would remember, like he could, like his whole system, because, you know, you come home after school, dad's working. So he's in his room, safe, protected. This is why he wanted to live in the woods away from society. I only feel safe if I'm in my room. You see how that transfers into
100%.
reclusivity? But the garage door goes up, heart rate starts to pound. Because now trouble's going to start because dad's home, right? So if that was your day to day with your parent or parents, like that just shows like you become steel, like you grow steel around yourself. You get armored, or you're a mess. Like it can go the other way. So anyway, that's kind of, we've already talked about just that in terms of, but so
going back to anger though,
to anger. So it is so important to understand that we're meant to have anger and healthy aggression. So it starts when we're little. So you might remember when your little ones got strong enough to, I don't know if your wife has long hair, but pull on hair.
Yeah.
Pull on beard.
Oh, yeah.
Rip your chest hairs out, right?
Yeah.
Feeding, they start to bite, that kind of thing. And that, it doesn't happen in the first few weeks. Everyone's going to be different. Maybe 6 months or somewhere like that. Like the strength comes in. It's their sympathetic nervous system starting to have more vibrancy, and they're playing with their power. And so if you have a parent who doesn't feel comfortable in their own power, which generally speaking, most people don't have a concept of that, they might be bad baby. I'm just making this up. Bad baby, stop it. I'm not going to give you love because you're hitting me. I'm not going to give you feeding because you're biting me. Stop biting me. And I had a girlfriend, this is a true story, or an acquaintance. She had a newborn and her little one started, I think, hitting her. But he was so little. Like, it's not like he's a 5-year-old, like smacking mom. And she didn't know what to do. Like she didn't have the intuitive knowledge, as most people don't, what to do with that. So she Googled, what do I do when my baby hits me? Google said, hit your baby back. No joke. There was some page that she found. And I've recently heard about this where there's a thing that doctors or pediatricians will say, and they'll say, if your baby does that, pinch them. So they get a little bit of a shock of a sensation and they know it's wrong. It's very Pavlovian.
Yeah, very Pavlovian.
And of course it's going to work because they don't want pain. And I'm like, oh my God, don't do that. And I said, well, this is what you do. The next time he pulls or hits, get excited, because that's sympathetic energy. He's wanting to fight, right? Get sympathetic. Don't get mean or mad. Be like, whoa, you are so strong. Look at how strong you are. And then take his little hands and do a little tug of war.
Yeah.
Or for fist play. And she's like, okay. So she did it. He loved it. He never hit her ever again.
Wow. So it's like integrating that right there.
Physiology.
Yeah.
Think about kittens, puppies, animals in the wild. They rough, they tumble, they bite each other, right? They gnaw. It's like they're not trying to hurt you. They're just getting used to this body of theirs. And again, this comes back to, we get these babies in our world and we're just like, oh, we're going to teach them piano and we're going to make sure that they can do sports and all these things. It's like, it's just a little mammal that needs to like learn about its body.
Yeah, and you see what happens with like lion with her cubs or these other mammals, and they absolutely let their kids bite all over them, or their cubs rather bite all over them, and they even play back and fight back with them. Yeah.
And so that's one piece, because that is, believe it or not, and I learned this is really Peter Levine's craft, like teaching about healthy aggression, anger, but also its connection with depression and chronic illness, because it's a dichotomy. Like you have one and then you have the other. If you can express healthy aggression and healthy anger and you have to internalize it, it literally consumes you. And this is connected to depression because you're having to go into that shutdown response of that parasympathetic. And so it dulls you, it stops you. It stops you from going forward. Like the root of aggression is aggredi, which is Latin, which is to go forward. I mean, your podcast is kind of
interesting.
It's kind of weird.
It's kind of weird.
It's to push forward, to keep going, right? And And you want to encourage that. But so many little ones like, don't do that. That's bad. We don't want to express in this way. You know, how many times did kids were told to go to their room if they got angry or if they, you know, hit their brother or sister? It's like, again, you don't want that to happen. Like, you might need to discipline that with healthy shame, which is a whole other topic. But
there's so many things I want to address in this thing.
But that is like, it has to be, and we could touch on it really quickly, but you will not be comfortable with some of these ways of interacting with this little tiny human animal if you are not comfortable in your own system with these things. And that is the crux. People ask, what do I do with my kids? What do I do with this? And unless the child actually has a disability, right? So I've worked with kids with CP and motor disorders, and yes, they need some manual help or birth trauma, or there's been surgical intervention or something like that. You might want that kiddo to go to a professional who's trained at the level I am and some of my colleagues to work with that directly. But let's just say birth was relatively healthy. There aren't any massive injuries or surgeries. When a parent regulates themselves and is working on themselves, I have seen it over and over again. The children naturally respond.
Yeah.
But if you try, because I have some people say, Irene, can my kid do your course? No, this is not for them. They don't need any courses. They're fine, right? They need to play and be connected to and to learn how to be in this world. That's it, right?
I think a lot of parents in this space, and I'll speak even for myself at some points in time, who are conscious and aware of these things, at some points adopt an approach of faking it, meaning that like they're in their nervous system internally is not matching what they're attempting in, you know, from a good intentions, let's say, from good intentions putting out, meaning that like they're doing all the things in reality, the behaviors are all there, right? But internally their nervous system is dysregulated, and that ultimately projects into their field, and the babies and the kids will pick up on that.
Oh, I've heard it. I have testimony of mothers who have said, I wanted this kid so bad. I had this kid late, so I had money, I had time, I read all the books, attachment parenting, co-parenting, feeding on demand, and it still didn't work. And it's because you just said it, my internal regulation was off the charts, dysregulated. And this is the part where it's so tough because you say to someone, okay, it would be really great if you could spend some time doing this work before you have a kid. That might not be an option depending on age. But then, of course, yes, you have parents who already have kids. So my experience is, and again, the primary parent, I mean, it'd be nice if there are two parents involved, that they're both doing this work. But as long as one is doing a good chunk of it, it then ripples out a little bit to the partner. I hate to say it, but usually it's the mothers that take this on.
I believe it.
Sorry, guys, but it's true. Not to say that it's odd. I've actually had more clients where the abusers are the mothers. It's just not that fathers don't abuse, but for whatever reason. But it is amazing how quick the child, the infant, the teenager, and even the adult, because I've worked with people who have adult kids, it changes them.
Wow. But
it only really works when the mom, the dad, whomever the caregiver is, does it because they want to get better.
They have to acknowledge that they need to get better first, though.
Yes, sir. If they're just trying to do it so that they have an easier life with their difficult kid, it's not going to work. Because again, it's a lie. And so you have to own up to, you made a mistake. This is the other thing, is if you can't own up to, yeah, I really screwed that up. I let my baby cry it out. I did all these things wrong. Yep, I spanked. I did all this. I had rules. I had conditions. I'm like, yep, you screwed up, And what can you do now to repair that? Because it's like saying, if you can't do that, then there's no point in us even having this conversation.
Right.
About changing generational trauma, as we did a little while ago. So yeah, if you are a parent with an adult child or a teenager child, you gotta figure this out. I would say teenagers are the tricky ones, though, because you kind of have this window from day one, well, obviously in utero, but day one, let's say, to prepubescent. Something occurs when we get to that age where we can start to procreate, where we really we should be autonomous.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say to a parent, you got to wait until they're old enough to get it. Because right now, their hormones and their brain and their social circles are more important than this.
They're individuating.
They're trying to.
Yeah.
Right? And yet, if you work on yourself, mom or dad, they're not typically stupid. Like, they're going to pick up on the subtle, slight differences in the home. They're going to see that you're not nagging them as much. They're going to see that you're asking questions as opposed to saying good job, bad job. Right? Curiosity is going to be more there because you're not as dysregulated. And they will pick up on that. They might not mention it. And in some ways you could say that's probably okay, because why would they? Because they're trying to detach from the family system. But that's the only tricky zone. I have seen parents in my classes and trainings where I've heard of great breakthroughs with teenagers, where the teenagers become almost more advanced than the parent because they're younger and they're not as enmeshed in their bad wiring.
Wow.
Like one student, I don't remember the context, but she has older kids, teenagers, and she got angry at something, and it wasn't violent angry. And they're old enough to see this. This is the other thing. You need to temper what you show kids based on their age, which is another topic. But anyway, this student of mine got a little fiery with something, and her teenager's like, "Good on you, mom. Way to be angry." You know, and she was just like, "Oh, wow." Like it was like this pivotal moment where she could not believe that I think it was her daughter, could pick up on this and saw how she's changing.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
It was really neat. It was really neat.
So on the topic of anger real quick, I have two questions as it relates to what you've just said. Would you say that obviously, because anger is a healthy, natural emotion that we are supposed to experience, which is so helpful to hear in the age of
nice.
whether spoken or this like subtle underlying feeling that, oh, anger is bad, we're not supposed to feel that, amongst sort of the new age side of things, that, okay, the best way to approach dealing with anger is to deal with it in a way that is unique to you, however it needs to come out, that is not projecting it onto other people. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, I think
I know that's simplified.
No,
and that can be
it's
a
good.
whole...
No, the interesting thing with anger is it is an emotion, but it's really a survival response. And that's where anger compared to sadness and joy and surprise are different. Anger and disgust are way more primal and way more survival based.
I've seen you, I think I watched one of your videos. You talked about disgust as the pathway to heal toxic shame.
You got it. Do you want to know why? Or
briefly,
I don't know.
If we can.
So, toxic shame is the kind of shame that occurs when you are ridiculed, belittled, and told, you know, you're stupid, you're an idiot, you stupid little fuck. How could you do that?
Oh, I had that growing up.
So, okay, let's park that. Healthy shame is don't touch the hot stove, or it's like that could hurt you, but it has to come out in a very strong, this is where that Om video that I talked about, you do need to have that deep baritone voice. It's like you see people in the park with their dogs and they're trying to discipline them with this high-pitched voice. It doesn't really work like that, right? It's like you need to be like, no, stop, come here, don't touch, right? Children need that. It's sort of like around the age of 3 when they start moving around and touching shit. Like you need to teach them right from wrong, but it has to come, it has to be a shame response that's healthy. I'll explain what that means in a second, because if it doesn't get into the body.
Yeah. This makes sense.
You have to actually have that tail between the legs. The spine has to curl. It is a bit of a collapse. They have to feel that so that they know this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to come with connection, because typically the tears will come and you actually oddly want that. But then it's like, oh, honey, I know that was scary, but you almost got hurt. We have to learn to not do these things, right? Whereas the toxic shame is just brutal abuse. It's violent, and it does have that tail curling under the shame, the collapse
like
of the spine.
That accompanied with, you stupid fuck, why would you do this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know any different.
Yeah.
I'm 4, right? And so my husband got that. And it is hard to figure out. But the disgust piece is, it's like this, it's like, I just did something bad.
And now you're talking about how
Disgust.
to heal your own toxic shame.
So to heal toxic shame, it's not an overnight sensation. Like it takes time, but part of it is learning to get into the physiology and learning to feel that terror, because it's terror that little one is going to feel when it doesn't have connection. When it's healthy, it's like, oh, I did something wrong, and oh, mom's still there and she still loves me and she's going to give me a hug, and now I'm learning why this is bad. Toxic is like, you're all on your own. Go to your room, figure it out. So there's isolation with that. You don't want that. The disgust piece comes in because you're literally, you feel... People will say, I've done something bad versus I am bad. The I am bad is the toxic piece, but you have done something bad, right? And so part of uncoupling that collapse and that I must be bad, you feel this disgust, not because of you, for what happened to you. It's like people that have been brutally raped and such, like, there is a level of disgust and it's real, but then they internalize it.
Yeah.
And
they take that on as, I am disgusting. I deserve this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets, you have this fight between the mind that shouldn't, I couldn't have fought, but I tried, but I couldn't. I feel disgusting. What am I supposed to do with this? I can't do anything. I don't know what to do. I'm going to just shut down. That's where that comes from. But to go back to anger, the interesting with disgust and anger is they have similar traits. Like when you're disgusted, you do something with your face, right? Ugh, right? But the teeth show.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
When a dog is pissed that you're about to come to its food.
Yeah.
So it has a very similar primitive muscular pattern in the face. The thing is again, if a person doesn't have that nuance of how to sense this, they're not even going to know what to feel. And so one of the issues with a lot of anger work, because people are like, oh, I'm going to go work on my anger, right, is it's cathartic. It's not connecting to, why do you have stored anger? Is it because you were toxically shamed? Is it because you weren't allowed to express yourself? Is it what was the reason? And you might not know the reason, but it comes back to like piecing together the physiological pieces to go, whoa, I really want to hurt something right now, or someone. And I think I want to hurt that father that was screaming bloody murder at me and telling me I was an idiot. But obviously we don't want to do that. And we know when that shit doesn't go unchecked, people do become violent, right? That's where that happens. It's not, people aren't inherently trying to hurt people. It's not our nature to do that. But if we were hurt, there is a fight in us that wants to fight back to get that protection out, but it's confused, especially when this happens when you're really little. And then this is where we come into kids who have outbursts, kids that have meltdowns. And it might not be that there was abuse in the family, but if they had a birth trauma and they were mishandled or they almost died, that's terrifying. Right? And so, again, this comes back to, how do we educate people on all these levels? Yeah. Because it could be so many things.
How do you help a kid in that case integrate something like that? Because this is a perfect transition, right? We've already talked to, like, okay, how do we behave with kids if they're new? Now kids who've already been traumatized to some degree.
So there's a lot of, how do I describe this? because it's not one thing. It's understanding kind of the principles, but...
And you go way deeper, by the way, for those who are listening, watching, she goes way deeper on all this stuff. This is just scratching the surface.
So I'm thinking about one kid. It was really simple. So this is a simple case.
Yeah.
He was bit by a dog in a park. He was like maybe 6 or 7. No, when did teeth come out? It was when he was losing his teeth.
Okay. So like 6 or 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Because my son is right now.
Okay. So, but I didn't know he was losing his teeth. So he comes in, that's the other thing. Both parents were there, which was great. So you have dual support, and I have a big office. I had a big office, and I'm like, okay, I don't even know what I did, but one thing led to another, asking me about him about dogs. And so we got down on the ground. Like, what does a dog do? And so he showed me. I'm like, okay. And I don't know, again, it's almost like Peter saying to his client, run like you're running. I had an apple on my desk. I'm like, I'm going to grab that apple. I'm like, take this apple. Pretend you're biting the dog. And so he was like, yeah. So there's his aggression. Because he got bit, it hurt, he collapsed. Right? I'm afraid. And basically, they couldn't go to parks because this kid didn't want to be near dogs. So he overcoupled going out to parks with bit by dog.
Right.
He bites into the apple. His tooth stays in the apple. Blood everywhere. I have no trouble with this. And we all just start laughing. And he starts laughing. It's a big deal when you lose your tooth. And that's all we needed to do.
Wow.
All he needed to do was bite that apple. And then it was implanted with a positive memory of, I just lost a tooth.
Yeah.
And it was fine.
Wow.
That's how simple that was.
Wow. So you could apply that in a bunch of different ways in a bunch of different scenarios in order to bring a new energy to that psychological attachment.
No.
No?
So almost.
Okay.
For kids and for adults, what's happening, there's something called procedural memory. So procedural memory from a basic is like, you know how to tie your shoelaces, you know how to ride a bike. You wouldn't want to relearn that each time. It's in there. It's in your system. It's in your motor complex. If you are harmed, or if you want to fight because you're being harmed or attacked, it's like the knife dropping that I mentioned.
Yeah.
You want to protect. So in this case, for this little kid, like, he is smaller probably than this dog. He was harmed. He was attacked. He went into shutdown. But there is part of him that wants to triumph and conquer and break out of that situation. Just like I'm sure when you were a kid, somewhere in you, you wanted to do something, and maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But you're still littler, probably, right? It gets a bit trickier when the child gets bigger than the parent.
Yep.
And sometimes you'll hear cases where finally the kid fights back. Maybe you did this.
This was my experience that made it stop.
Exactly. So here's probably my small assessment of you is you were able to do that, which is good. So you were able to, we call it, complete a trapped traumatic procedural memory.
I would say complete with an asterisk, because I spent the following years having a lot of rage that if one of my friends would get pushed in a bar, I would be the one to under the guise of defending my friend, go up and headbutt that dude and then beat his ass. So
the difference between you and this little kiddo is he just got bit by a dog once. You got yelled at and more than once. So it is a start to fight back to your dad or your father, but then there's all the hurt and the grief and the pain that is under that. And so when I say it's more than psychological, it is in your physiology to protect yourself. And then you're with your buddies. It's like, I'm going to protect everyone because I don't want anybody to get hurt. And we see this. We'll see this in movement, social justice. It's like, are you really there for that cause?
Right. Or are you projecting your own hurt onto this situation?
I think that's most of the case.
Totally.
Not and by the way, not to say that there aren't people that do real good humanitarian work. Of course.
Well, it can still lead to positive effects.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Kelly Brogan and I have talked about this too, or I don't know if we talked about it or if she talked about it on a talk that I saw of hers. Anyway, basically the same thing, that like a lot of the activist phase that she noticed in herself was a result of her own unprocessed stuff. And she sees that in a lot of activists.
And you don't see it until you see it.
Yeah.
And that's the part, because when you are in that strong survival-based activism world, you are trying to save the world, but you don't realize how darn, it's called overcoupled it is with your own pain. It isn't really, it is about helping them, but if you really keep digging and digging, it's like, what did you not get when you were young?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, that example with the kid is simple. It's not always that simple. And this is where, again, to go back to parents, if you know there were issues, maybe there was birth trauma, maybe you did some bad stuff, get it done soon. Like work on it when they're young, if you can, before they hit teenage years, because they're in a different state. Like they're younger. It's just easier.
A lot of people will say age 0 to 7 is when they're most impressionable. Is that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
I would agree.
If let's say your kid's 3, 4, something like that, is it still much easier within that window, even if you have messed up? So it requires that, okay, you acknowledge as a parent, like, yeah, I fucked up. I was doing, maybe you say, I was doing the best that I could with the tools I had at that time, whatever it is, but you just acknowledge in some way, okay, yeah, I messed up. Now it's about fixing this. And I think this is a great segue, if you will, into the real work that needs to be done is here, like internal, you first, right?
Yeah.
So this is such a broad question. I feel like this right here, this whole chunk could be a whole episode in and of itself.
Sure.
But as best as we can, and you'll know where to take it better than I could, we're walking around, we've talked about how and why possibly, is like traumatized, conditioned adults living in modernity, not living the way that I think and most people have come to realize human beings are supposed to be living, right? So how do we, given that, irrespective of whether we have kids or not, do the work to come back into a healthy nervous system that has a high tolerance for various events and triggers?
So if I'm quite tactical about it, the first step, and I don't like steps, but I'll name it that way so it's simple, is you have to want to. I know that might sound really basic, but I can't tell you how many times I had people dropped off at my office because their mom or their wife or whatever wanted them to get some work done. So this comes back to free will. So you can have your free will even when you're in dysregulation, but this is where the psychology comes in. You have to have a psyche that wants to dig into the junk. Yeah. So that's number one. It also, just to give it like 1A, like you also have to realize that there will be moments on this path, if you want to call it that, where you're gonna hate that you even started this. So you just have to acknowledge that. And it also means that you don't have to go balls to the wall. Like you can just take a break and do a little bit. We would call this titration. Like, how can we titrate this in little bits so that you don't overwhelm the system, so you totally give up? And having been in the fitness industry for as long as I was, one of the reasons I left was because I couldn't implement change at a deep core level. I would write these programs. I would teach people how to do the things. I hated personal training because I did that for a while, because nobody was there because they wanted to be there. They were just there because they knew they had to. And so what would happen is I can't make it, so they're not going to exercise. Or I'd give them all these beautiful programs, put them in the little file folder thing at the gym. And for the first 2 months of the year, because it's always in the new year, people are all gung-ho, but it's survival based. Yeah. And so they would have that to keep them going. Again, it comes back to how we were taught in school. You don't study if it's not on the test. Right. Is it on the test? If it's on the test, I'm not going to look at it. Right. So that's how deep this goes. Totally. And so I put a lot of time on this because the rest is actually quite easy because it's in our biological makeup to be regulated. The animal species and kingdom would not survive if it wasn't the case. That's why I always say baby little animals, they are fine because it's just in them.
Yeah.
So you got to want it.
So real quick on that.
Yeah.
Do you think that, unfortunately, because a lot of people are, for lack of a better term, forced into this, or they feel like they have to, in order to really want it, it requires that people hit rock bottom in some way.
Yeah.
Whether with their physical health or...
I hate to say that, but I hate that.
No, I do too. But like at the same time, you can look back on that and be very grateful for it if you end up doing the work because of it.
I think, if I wanted to scare anybody into doing it, I would say just look at the ACE study. Because that study shows without a shadow of a doubt a correlation. But heck, it was 17,000 people. So
yeah, it's a lot of people.
And it's been replicated across most continents. If you do not regulate your nervous system at this core level, and I don't mean biohacking regulating,
right,
real regulating, you will most likely get a disease and die of that. Even if you're eating well, even if you're exercising. I know that's really harsh, but it just is the truth. Because again, it goes back to that core rest and digest. You can be really healthy with the external behaviors, but if the internal physiology is still like hanging on for dear life in survival physiology, that is going to overtake all the healthy food and all the healthy retreats and all the meditation and all the blah, blah, blah. It's just not going to do it. So that's where I kind of say, if you really want to live long and well and not be dependent on the system, not need a care home, and you just like, my goal, I hope, is like, I just want to die in my sleep. Healthy. Not having needed a wheelchair, not needing feeding tubes. It's just like, take me when it's time.
I forget who I was talking to, but I think like, I don't remember who it was, but one of the episodes I've recorded in this studio, I think like the true way, or they said this, and I agree with it, the true way human beings are supposed to die is that like, I feel complete now.
And it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm done now. I feel complete. I'm going to go to the next one.
I have that feeling often. So hope, it happens often on
we'll
planes.
stay friends. So you let me know.
Yeah. It drives my husband
you
crazy.
You text me when you say, Alec, I feel complete now.
Yeah. It drives Seth crazy. He's like, I wish you would stop saying that. I'm like, I've done enough. Like, I'm not saying I'm done.
You said you feel like that right now?
Yeah.
Don't say that.
So, no, I know.
You're doing such important work right now. We need you here.
Thank you. But
you're not complete yet.
But what I'm saying is like, I see people who are so afraid of death, and I know usually it's because they haven't connected to real living.
Yeah.
And if you've never connected to real living, you actually know that you haven't, and you don't know what that is. So you're searching for it through all these things. Let's do it. Like you said, I think it's interesting that you've had that desire to maybe do ayahuasca and then it just keeps fading. That to me is a really good sign. Like, not to say that those aren't good sometimes, but I have seen people have just a powerful experience working on themselves in all the facets and be totally enamored and just like, I can feel the vibrations of everything. You don't need that.
I feel that in this conversation right now. I'm not even kidding.
Thanks.
Like, absolutely. This is the type of conversation that makes me say, I don't need to do ayahuasca.
Good.
Because like, this is amazing.
It takes guts to get to that when you're in a world where everyone's doing it. And I mean, and it's like, it comes back to that word that I think got overused a little while ago, sovereign.
Yeah.
We do have that. So that first step, you want it. You got to want it. The second thing would be biological impulses. So this is going to sound so basic, but like, when you're thirsty, drink water. When you're hungry, eat, because you're listening to your biology. When you have to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. When you have to sneeze, sneeze. Don't hold it in. When you have to cough, cough. Pass gas, pass gas. Now, not hungry, don't eat. How many people just go to the refrigerator and look in it because of whatever, but they're not hungry? It's like this habit that we've learned, right?
Coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism. So if we go back to babies, that's what they need. They're hungry. They let you know, you feed them. Obviously in our generations, typically babies wear diapers. I get why, we're not on the floor of the savannah crawling around. So it's different. I'm not against diapers, but it's like, change it. They're tired, let them rest. They want to play, you got to play with them. Right. And so same with you. If you are tired, and this is where it gets tricky, because if someone is living in chronic fatigue, pain, autoimmune, they're always tired. And this is where then you have to find the nuance of, well, what does that mean? Do you need to take a nap, or do you need just to sit? Do you need to just sit and listen to music? Will that be enough? So this is where it gets a little deeper into the nuance. Yeah. But I am amazed when I just say to folks, do this for a few weeks, for a month, and see what you start to notice. You will start to pick up on things that you've never considered. And that is the beginning of getting into the interoception. Because you have to be in connection with your internal environment, this perception of the internal environment, in order to process old dysregulations and traumas. And most people take no time to do that. They just try to go in, let's release this trauma. Let's think about the worst thing that ever happened to you, and let's just get it out.
Yeah.
Like with an axe.
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, the system will know what to do when the time is right, but you have to lay, it's like you have to lay the foundations.
Yeah.
Right? Systems theory kind of thing. And so, or chaos, I should say. So it's like, work with that, see how you can listen to those things, and you may be surprised at how often you don't listen to the needs of your body. Hopefully that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. Where in that process, if any, I'm thinking of like, okay, human beings require movement. Human beings, I think, require, I'm gonna say it, I think require getting up with the sun, or at least attempting to. So those are, I think, biological necessities for human beings. Now, what happens if you don't have the urge to do those things? Something's
off.
Okay, got it.
Now, I will call myself out on this, even though I know all the circadian stuff. If I'm tired, I'm going to sleep.
So maybe that's what you need, though.
Exactly.
Because I take you to be like, even when you first walked in and I gave you a hug, I'm like, I'm going to love this because you're very present and calm.
I can get riled up too. Don't worry. No, I'm joking.
Okay, well, at least today. My experience of you today is that. So
yeah, no, thank you. No, that's just it. I would need the sleep. Like babies, they're not just going to wake up when it's sunny and go to sleep, right? They go based on their cycles. So
you're reintegrating what a baby is, essentially. Yes. So maybe it's not that you need to totally disconnect from the circadian rhythm stuff. You need to be cognizant of that, but also cognizant of, most important is I'm trying to integrate my biological functions as a baby that were not integrated.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And I think this is the part where it depends on where you're at on this level of learning this, like how dysregulated you may be or not. Like, I know that, when the sun goes down, technically, according to my friends who you shouldn't eat, you shouldn't have any light on. It should all be dim light, no TV, no phone. Yeah, right. Like I'm going to do that. Not that I don't respect why that's there, but that's when I see my husband. We have dinner together every single night. We cook dinner, we clean up the kitchen, we get ready for the next day. Yes, we have perfect, beautiful, dim, like orange lights. But I'm not going to not eat my steak and rice at 8:00 because I'm not supposed to. I'm going to do it. Right. Yeah. So again, I think it comes down to, it's the dogma piece.
Yeah.
Like if you are stressing out following those orders to make a healthy system, I think we've lost focus. But if you're going to experiment, let's try it this way. Let's figure this out. You might find, you're right. I actually don't want to eat after the sun goes down. So I think it's context, but baby, yes, I always go back to the baby because they know exactly what they need. It's us that screws them up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So following impulse is so important. But you're not going to just, if you're in I had to go pee before we stopped, but I was fine. I could have kept going. I'm not going to hurt myself, right? So there's also that. It's like you got to be real with it a little bit. The other thing then, and these next ones are not in order of importance, but the ability to sense your breath and not change it.
That is such an important nuance there, because what a lot of people will say, and I've even said this shit, and I can totally see what you're getting at there. The tendency is to become aware of your breath and then change it into a deep breathing pattern or box breathing, which I'm not going to say doesn't have some positive effects sometimes, but it's more so just of noticing where you're at biologically right now.
So I go back to the baby.
Yeah.
Your baby's crying. You're not going to say to that baby that's in physiological distress, I need you to
box breathe with me,
hold
baby.
for 5, inhale for 5, hold for 5, and exhale for 5.
Right.
It won't work.
No way.
So how will that work at really restoring proper regulation to a system that has trapped survival trauma from the past? Now, there's nothing wrong with doing some box breath or the classic Andrew Weil breathing of, 4, 7, 8.
Yeah.
I've done that if I've felt the need to I'm on a plane and I'm just a little stressed or whatever. But some aspects of our stored survival stress have no breathing, shallow breathing, hyperventilating. And often when I was in private practice, I would have to tell people to stop breathing. They'd be like this. I'm like, you got to stop that. And and I wouldn't say it quite like that, but what would it be like to just not do that the next time you feel the urge? What would inevitably happen? They would feel the tension, the burning in the throat, and that usually precedes tears. It's them holding in the grief. It's them holding in the sensation. So this goes back to what you were saying about just being with the sensation. If someone is feeling that sensation and all they know, you are missing the train of that survival stress piece that needs to rock out of your system with deep tears, with, right? When a kid cries, I mean, your kids, they fall, break, broken skin, scrape the knees. It's like this, it's deadly. It's like they're hyperventilating, they're red in the, exactly, right? That is them trying to find breath because they've just gone into shock. So the diaphragm seizes, it's not moving, it's tight, and they're trying to find that, basically they're trying to find a threshold to come out and deactivate. But if you interrupt that, again, great example, your kid falls down, obviously don't leave them, but be next to them and let them do their thing. Don't ask, are you okay? Wait until they go through their process, and then they will look for you, and then they'll reach. And then you hold them. That must have been so scary. Mom's here, dad's here. You're going to be okay. What do we need to get you? Let's get a Band-Aid. Let's clean up the boo-boo, all those things. But you will see the natural release of that stress response if you just let them do their thing. Within safety, of course. If they fall on a road and there's cars, scoop them out, obviously. Common sense. But that breath piece is messing people up because we are being taught you've got to breathe deep and breathe even and all this. It's like, yes, if you're an opera singer, but it's like when you're working with this trauma piece and this nervous system piece, you have to realize, what did the system have to go into? What did the breath do naturally to preserve, to protect, to shut down?
Wow. Yeah.
And I've sat with clients where they don't breathe for like a minute and a half. And you just have to trust that eventually, if someone, like, near drowning is a big thing, near choking is a big thing. A lot of kids deal with that. And so if they have a near-death experience of almost drowning or choking, you have to let them go to that rock bottom of, I think I might not take another breath.
Wow.
The eyes bug out, and you'll meet people that have these eyes that are bugged out. And I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, but it's essentially terror.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Dispenza has some of that if you really look at his eyes.
That is very true.
Sorry,
Wow.
Joe.
Wow. I've never thought about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he had a horrific accident.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of trauma work he's done at his physiological level. I sure hope he's done some of it, but his affect tells me that there is still a lot of shock in that system and mostly terror. So, these are the cues you see in people. So the breath thing is it sounds so simple, but what will happen, anybody listening to this, you're going to try to just let the breath be how it wants to be, and you're going to realize how conditioned you've become to change your breath. And then the other two thing, and this is more basic, and this is by no means my full body of work, because it is not, but can you feel what is under you? The chair, the ground, the environment, like where is your physicality and your kinesthetic sense? Chances are, and I'm just going to call this out of like 100 people listening to this, probably more than 50 will not have considered their connection with what they're sitting on and that tactile sense until I tell you that. When we have full regulation on board and we have all these faculties, we are always feeling what we're on. Right. That's why I'm constantly reshifting, right? Because this is soft. And so I'm moving down. And so I'm reshifting. A lot of people will sit on something and they don't even know what they're on. And then that's a whole line of where we get into asymmetries with the spine and
Wow.
how we sit at our desks. Are we even aware that we have a skeleton that supports us? Because that's what's supposed to support us, not our muscles. And that's the Feldenkrais conversation that we will have to have at another time.
There's so many things I wanted to touch on.
And then the final thing would be are we aware of the environment around us? So a very classic Peter Levinian thing would be orienting and seeing the space around you. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's one of the most important ones, but it depends on the person's level of survival stress. Some people will look around and see the space, and it'll calm them. It'll actually put them into more good parasympathetic, or not good, but rest digest. Some people will have never considered that they have never intentionally looked around a room because the way they grew up, the environment was terrifying.
Yeah, not safe. So they were down.
Hypervigilant. And so you can have a hypervigilance of constantly looking for danger, but you're never actually looking like you would a vista, a sunset or the ocean. So all these pieces blending how we orient, how we sense the surface. I didn't even get into body sensation, but that's another one. Impulse, breath. The pièce de résistance would be having all these things together at the same time. And so I would call that multitasking awareness. And you will not believe how tough it is for some people to even have two things at the same time in their awareness.
Wow.
So can you notice your breath, not change it? Notice the ground and how your body is against it. Notice that you're nodding your head. Notice that there's a person over there, there's lights there, there's a red thing there, and still be calm and chilled out and in social engagement. And that's the Ferrari running at a good level with all the things. And then you add in navigating a busy street, traffic, sport, cooking food, kids that are cranky, partner that's whatever. Can you stay in that awareness and that regulation with all that stuff going on? And that can take years to develop because we just have all these old habits and conditions in us that are just running the show. So you've got to kind of do it piecemeal. So it's clunky at the beginning. It's like you're learning your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and eventually you put together words, and then you put together sentences, and then you can freestyle it. So at the beginning, there often has to be a structured practice.
Yeah. As I was going to say, it's discipline, but it's not like forced discipline.
No.
It all starts with your intention. You have to want to do it first anyway.
You got it.
Yeah.
So, and then as you become connected to these ways of being, I call them neurosensory exercises, because at any moment I might say, okay, if you're feeling this thing and you all of a sudden have a thought or you have a desire to move, you've got to go to that. Don't ignore it. in a lot of the mind-body practices, they don't give enough wiggle room and opportunity to improvise.
Yeah.
But how can a person improvise if they don't even know what that means?
Right.
Right. So there's many layers to that, but that's in essence how that is. And then of course there's working with the viscera, layers, kidneys, brainstem, the vagus nerve.
We're going to have you back
toning.
on for part 2, part 3.
Seems that way.
So we have to. Like this has been epic, and I feel like we covered so much, but still, I won't say only scratch the surface.
We've scratched the surface.
We scratched the surface. Yeah.
So we've scratched the surface, I think, at enough macro and micro levels that hopefully people are seeing regulating your nervous system and working on the nervous system from the somatic lens. It cannot be done with just somatic movement. Mm-hmm. It cannot be done with just trauma release exercises. You really need to understand the historical element of what our nervous systems have been through, like from a conditioning point of view, from an ancestral point of view, from a biological point of view. Like I actually like having running water coming out of my taps and flushing toilets, and I like modern aspects of life. I actually wouldn't want to just live in the woods fending for my life. But there's a way to do this life if we have this piece, because what I see is people designate times of the week to work on their nervous system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that? It's like, I'm going to go to this class and this class and this, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But if you then leave those classes and you're devoid of that awareness, it's never going to sink in.
Yeah.
And so it has to be integrated into daily life. And then then the conundrum is, are you living with people that can help you perpetuate that? And that is part 5 of our conversation, because that goes into relationship, right? It's like, I've seen people break up over this stuff. Like, it is very difficult to live this level of nuance and regulation if you have someone in your environment who doesn't give a fucking shit about this, because you will constantly be in a state of survival stress. There are some students, clients that we work with who are still at home with abusive parents, and they're in a real bind, right? And by parents, I don't mean minors. I mean adults who are still living, because they have to with their parents. It's like, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
It's so tough. Or you have that person who's dependent on their partner financially, and if they leave, they're on the streets. They really are, because all their family is abusive. Like, what's better, this kind of abuse or this kind of abuse? I'm like, I really can't answer that question for you. So there's also, this goes back to the Matrix being so brilliant. Like, do you want to just keep eating the steak or know what's really there? Of course, that's, I'm sure we both eat steak, but it's like, yeah, I want my steak, and I also want this, and I also want the awareness. But yeah, you got to be really aware of how going into this it's going to just ricochet across everything.
That's where you have to want it again. You have to want it.
You got to want it, because if you want it bad enough, the other stuff will seem petty. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I love that too, because maybe the impetus to get you to want it, especially if you have kids, we talked a lot about kids, is like, do it for your kids. And like, ultimately you have to do it for you, but
I think that's a good impetus though.
Yeah.
Because if you've chosen to have kids, they are your responsibility.
Yeah, literally.
When they're minors.
Yeah. And
so that for some is actually what gets them into this. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And then some people just want the planet to be better. And the thing is like, when you are healthier, the planet is better. As cliche as it is, it's true. So how you talk to anybody you interact with is going to be different. Whether it's the barista, the cab driver, it's like, it's going to ripple out. And so even if you are solo, you're never going to have kids, you will still impact. People who go through our courses, they start to like have thriving plants. I have so many pictures of before and afters of their like dead limp plants, because they can't attune to them. They can't tell when they need care, more light, less water. And they're just treating the plant robotically.
But it's also their field.
Yeah.
It's also their field too.
Yes. 100%. Like they are in a different state, and it's pretty cool to see that. And so to me, that is the data point that lets me know, okay, when we are regulating this system of ours that is electrical, biological, chemical, spiritual, soul, it's like, it's going out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I got to have you come back on. Like,
okay. Yeah, you got a lot more questions there.
I have a lot,
I looked at them
more. Yeah, a lot more. This is amazing though, Irene. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome.
Yeah, this is amazing.
It was a really good, it was a great conversation. This is only the second time I've done in person, and it's so much better than online. Much better. So thank you for inviting and being adamant that it had to be in person.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Alec.